Chapter 1484, 100 feet. Chapter 1484, 100 feet. When Rakshasa Hous heard the words Desolate Marshal, he was stunned for a moment as well before reacting. He's definitely not Desolate Marshal. Rakshasa Hous sneered. Everyone knows that Desolate Marshal has already entered the conjoint body realm. I reckon that this is merely a clone of Desolate Marshal. Rakshasa nodded as well. That was the most logical explanation. Typically, if cultivators cultivated cloning techniques, their cultivation realms would be lower than their prime bodies and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. Initially, I merely wanted to explore Pingyang town and eat some small fries. To think that I would catch a big fish here. Rakshasa Hous grinned. Desolate Marshal, you're merely a Dharma characteristic clone. How dare you go against me? Even if your prime body comes, I'll rip him apart. Rakshasa said indifferently, I've long heard that Desolate Marshal has a Dragon Phoenix clone. To think that you have a third clone. Since your prime body is hiding, I'll destroy your clone today. Initially, Rakshasa was not interested in Pingyang town. However, since Desolate Marshal's clone was discovered, their trip was not wasted. The Marshal Dao prime body had an indifferent expression. Indeed, I cultivate a cloning technique. However, you guys are wrong about one thing. Oh. Rakshasa raised her brow. The Marshal Dao prime body said slowly, to be precise, the Dragon Phoenix body and Green Lotus body are both my clones. What you're seeing now is my prime body. Rakshasa and Rakshasa Hous were slightly stunned. Ha 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 ha. Immediately Rakshasa Hous burst into laughter. Desolate Marshal, oh Desolate Marshal. Do you think I'll believe such nonsense? A Dharma characteristic prime body? I can crush you with a single finger. Is that so? The Marshal Dao prime body drank the hot tea in his cup and stood up slowly. An extremely terrifying aura burst forth from the Marshal Dao prime body. Although it was just a simple motion of rising, it affected the world. Instantly, the void trembled. Suddenly, a phantom appeared behind the Marshal Dao prime body and soared into the skies. A heaven and earth Dharma characteristic. Back in the North Sea, even when the Marshal Dao prime body fought against 3 conjoint body grand demons, he did not use his heaven and earth Dharma characteristic. That was because there was no need for that. However, it was different now. Although the 2 of them were both at the conjoint body realm, they were from the Rakshasa race, one of the primordial races. One of them was even the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. Her combat strength was so terrifying that she could kill human half-martial ancestors with ease. Foo-foo. Rakshasa Hous sneered, how dare you take out a technique like a heaven and earth Dharma characteristic? Even a supreme Dharma characteristic won't be able to defend against a single punch from me. Rakshasa did not laugh. She felt a shuddering aura from the Dharma characteristic that was rising rapidly. How was that possible? How could a mere heaven and earth Dharma characteristic threaten her? 90 feet. In the blink of an eye, the heaven and earth Dharma characteristic of the Marshal Dao prime body had already climbed to a height of 90 feet. However, the heaven and earth Dharma characteristic was still growing rapidly without any signs of stopping. Could Desolate Marshal's Dharma characteristic have also been cultivated to a height of 99 feet? Rakshasa frowned slightly. Back in the Battle of Heaven and Earth Valley, the Green Lotus True Body had once used a 99 feet tall heaven and earth Dharma characteristic to kill a conjoint body mighty figure of the primordial races. Of course, Rakshasa was fearless. Although the 99 feet tall heaven and earth Dharma characteristic was troublesome to deal with, it was not a threat to her. 91 feet. 95 feet. 99 feet. An incomparably tall phantom soared into the skies with a terrifying aura. Standing upright, it had a burning gaze like a divine being. Immediately after, right in front of Rakshasa and Rakshasa Hous, the 99 feet tall heaven and earth Dharma characteristic rose by another foot. Boom. Boom. Heaven and earth rumbled. An incomparably thick pressure descended. This power surpassed common sense and limits. Even this world could not accommodate this Dharma characteristic. Thin tears appeared in the void around the heaven and earth Dharma characteristic. 100 feet. 100 feet Dharma characteristic. In the cultivation world, 9 was an extreme number. Even the Green Lotus True Body only reached a height of 99 feet after fusing the 3 supreme Dharma characteristics and did not break through that barrier. However, the prime body cultivated 100 sutras with the Marshal Dao furnace and smelted all dharmic arts. forming an unprecedented 100-feet-tall Dharma characteristic. If there was truly the saying of peerless, that heaven and earth Dharma characteristic could be considered as peerless Dharma characteristic. None of the heaven and earth Dharma characteristics could ride above it. Even Monk Daming's 4 supreme dharmic bodies could not defend against the might of this peerless Dharma characteristic. The existence of the martial Tao prime body was a variable. Nobody could divine his future. Rakshasa Yu's expression turned pale instantly. Although the difference between 99 feet and 100 feet was only a foot tall, the difference was like heaven and earth. The peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body lowered its head slightly and looked down at Rakshasa Tua and Rakshasa Yu. Its gaze shone like 2 blazing suns that could not be ignored. For the first time, Rakshasa Tua felt insignificant in the face of this peerless Dharma characteristic. It felt as though he was being glared at by a true god, as though he could be suppressed to death at any moment. Rakshasa race? In my eyes you're ants as well. The martial Tao prime body said slowly with a voice like a gigantic bell and unparalleled might. So what if it's 100 feet? It's just a Dharma characteristic after all. Rakshasa Tua channeled his bloodline wildly and roared into the skies. 2 cold, shimmering curved sabers appeared between his hands as he flapped his wings, wanting to make use of his movement technique to maneuver around the peerless Dharma characteristic that was 100 feet tall. You overestimate yourself. The martial Tao prime body sneered and his spirit consciousness moved. The peerless Dharma characteristic behind him suddenly extended its palm and suppressed Rakshasa Tua. That gigantic palm covered the skies. A terrifying might and berserk power rained down. Even Rakshasa Tua's speed became extremely slow under the envelopment of that power. Rakshasa Tua's movement technique was completely useless against the suppression of the peerless Dharma characteristic. He could only choose to fight against the peerless Dharma characteristic head-on. Ah! Rakshasa Tua roared and channeled his bloodline dharmic powers. He raised the 2 sabers in his hands and slashed towards the palm of the peerless Dharma characteristic. Clang! The 2 sabers of Rakshasa Tua struck the palm of the peerless Dharma characteristic and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. They could not slash their way in. Pust! Rakshasa Tua's expression changed. The dharmic powers of 100 feet tall heaven and earth Dharma characteristic were already condensed to this point and were indestructible. Even mighty figured dharmic weapons could not hurt it. A tremendous power surged into Rakshasa Tua's body through the curved saber. Poof! 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 Rakshasa Tua's arms exploded into a blood mist. Immediately after, his upper body, chest, legs and head exploded into a blood mist under the suppression of that terrifying power. Boom! Boom! The palm of the peerless Dharma characteristic crushed down and pushed Rakshasa Tua onto the ground, turning him into a meat sludge. His essence spirit did not even have a chance to escape and died on the spot. The martial Tao prime body attacked. All it took was a single punch to suppress a conjoint body mighty figure of the Rakshasa race completely. 1. Chapter 1485, Submit or Die. Chapter 1485, Submit or Die. Rakshasa Tua had died too quickly. Rakshasa Yu was stunned by the 100 feet peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body. Before she could react, Rakshasa Tua was already dead. The martial Tao prime body had a cold expression as his gaze shifted to Rakshasa Yu. The peerless Dharma characteristic behind him did the same thing. 2 divine lights shone down and Rakshasa Yu felt a tremendous pressure as though she no longer had any secrets. Submit or die. The martial Tao prime body said slowly. The peerless Dharma characteristic spoke at the same time. The voice was deafening and reverberated through the world. Even when Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Tua descended, the martial Tao prime body had already activated the array formation around the place and isolated it. Otherwise, the mere aftershock of their exchange would have been enough to raze Pingyang town to the ground. Bow down. As though she had heard the greatest joke in the world, Rakshasa Yu laughed out of anger. So what if you're 100 feet tall Dharma characteristic? Is a Dharma characteristic Tao Lord worthy of me making me submit? Rakshasa Yu's figure flashed as she wielded her curved saber and charged towards the martial Tao prime body. The men of the Rakshasa race had green faces and bared fangs. There were even wings on their backs that were terrifying. However, the women of the Rakshasa race were unusually beautiful. They did not have any meat wings or sharp nails and merely looked taller than ordinary humans. Although she did not have meat wings, Rakshasa Yu's movement technique was even faster than Rakshasa Tua. The speed of the Rakshasa race was the fastest among the primordial 9 races. Even the Golden Crow race was slightly inferior. However, the peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body distorted the void everywhere its gaze could reach. Any single step it took caused the ground to quake. Even a single breath of air from this peerless Dharma characteristic would create a dermic power cyclone and condense a terrifying dermic art. Every single move was a dermic art. Instantly, the dermic powers in that part of the world surged. No matter how fast Rakshasa was, she had to have enough space to dodge. However, this world was filled with endless dermic arts and every single one of them was shockingly powerful. She could not dodge it all. Impossible. Rakshasa had a bewildered expression and her beautiful eyes shone with panic. A person's time and energy are limited. How can he cultivate so many dermic arts? 1. Boom. The peerless Dharma characteristic punched over and a gigantic air current surged. That punch seemed like it could break a hole in the firmaments. Rakshasa had nowhere to run. Desolate Marshal, you've gone too far. Suddenly, Rakshasa shrieked and channeled her bloodline. She conjured hand seals with both hands and struck the gigantic fist. At the same time, her eyes lit up as she swung the curved saber in her hands and hollered softly, "Apocalyptic Rakshasa slash." A saber shadow flashed and slashed towards the fist of the peerless Dharma characteristic. The eyes of the martial Tao prime body focused. To everyone else, that was merely a slash from Rakshasa. However, he could see that Rakshasa had slashed hundreds of times in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of slashes were released at an extremely fast speed without any delays. All of them stacked together and formed a saber shadow. The burst of the secret skill increased the might of the slash by folds. That slash was indeed qualified to be called apocalyptic. Boom. Many dermic arts collided against the fist of the martial Tao prime body's peerless Dharma characteristic like rocks sinking into the ocean without causing any ripples. Thereafter, the saber shadow descended and slashed the fist of the peerless Dharma characteristic. Boom. There was a deafening bang. Peerless sharpness splattered everywhere and the void trembled. The apocalyptic Rakshasa slash was shattered by a single punch from the peerless Dharma characteristic. Cracks appeared on the fist of the peerless Dharma characteristic. That slash had still injured the peerless Dharma characteristic in the end. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and someone whose cultivation realm was a major cultivation realm above the martial Tao prime body, Rakshasa was definitely not someone easy to deal with. Break. Unable to shatter the peerless Dharma characteristic with a secret skill, Rakshasa channeled her bloodline once more and the sound of tsunami echoed from her body. Thereafter, a phenomenon rose behind her. It was no wonder why Rakshasa was this generation's monster incarnate of the Rakshasa race. She had already cultivated a bloodline phenomenon. 5 Rakshasa women appeared around Rakshasa. They were beautiful and flawless, wearing veils with charming figures. However, they had cold expressions and glared at the martial Tao prime body without any emotions. Kill? Rakshasa hollered. The 5 Rakshasa women beside her attacked at the same time and released their apocalyptic Rakshasa slash. 5 saber shadows descended. This time round, even the peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body could not dodge and was struck heavily by the 5 apocalyptic Rakshasa slashes. Crack, crack, crack. The body of the peerless Dharma characteristic gradually cracked. No matter how strong the peerless Dharma characteristic was, there was a limit. Under the continuous attacks of Rakshasa, the peerless Dharma characteristic finally could not hold out. In the blink of an eye, it dissipated. Hee. Rakshasa stood in the circle of 5 Rakshasas and sneered like a moon illuminated by a group of stars. Desolate Marshal, your 100 feet Dharma characteristic is shattered. Let's see what you have to make me submit. Bloodline phenomenon. The martial Tao prime body said indifferently, I have one too. Before his sentence was finished, the figure of the martial Tao prime body suddenly vanished. Rakshasa heart skipped a beat and she tensed up instantly. She released her spirit consciousness and scanned her surroundings continuously, but she could not find any trace of the martial Tao prime body. Desolate Marshal, where are you? Rakshasa was a little nervous and channeled her bloodline phenomenon. The 5 Rakshasa women protected her tightly. Suddenly, she felt the temperature of the entire world climb and purple flames burned furiously in the void. The bloodline phenomenon of the martial Tao prime body was a gigantic furnace. It was the martial Tao furnace that could nurture 100 sutras and smelt all dermic arts as well as heaven and earth. The reason why Rakshasa you could not see the martial Tao prime body was because she was already in the gigantic furnace. This was a fight between bloodline phenomenons. Swoosh. A Rakshasa woman beside Rakshasa you blazed with flames and soared into the skies. In the blink of an eye, the Rakshasa woman condensed from the bloodline phenomenon was reduced to ashes. Rakshasa Yu's expression turned paler. She had already realized that she had fallen into the other party's bloodline phenomenon. Submit or die. The voice of the martial Tao prime body sounded with endless might and dominance. There was no third option for Rakshasa Yu. She either had to submit or die. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, how can I submit to you? Rakshasa Yu sneered, Desolate martial, dream on. Swoosh. As the purple flames surged, another Rakshasa woman turned into nothingness and vanished. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In just a few breaths, the Rakshasa women beside Rakshasa Yu were all refined by the martial Tao furnace. This meant that Rakshasa Yu's bloodline phenomenon was burned to ashes by the martial Tao furnace. Submit or die. The voice of the martial Tao prime body sounded once more. However, this time round, apart from endless might, there was a hint of determination, coldness and killing intent in his voice. Chapter 1486, Protecting Ethereal. Chapter 1486, Protecting Ethereal. Rakshasa Yu had already realized that Desolate Martial would truly refine her to ashes if she did not submit. Desolate Martial did not care about women at all. For some reason, Rakshasa Yu suddenly felt aggrieved. Up till this point of her cultivation, her talent was terrifying and her beauty was unparalleled across the races. There were countless paragons and monster incarnates pursuing her. When had she ever suffered such grievances? She had never been bullied like this before. She was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and was unusually prideful. In her opinion, there was no one in this world who could make her submit. In fact, there was no one in the entire Rakshasa race that was worthy of her, let alone make her submit. However, the dominance of the martial Tao prime body caused Rakshasa Yu's conviction to collapse. Up till this point of her cultivation, she had never encountered someone so unreasonable and domineering. Instantly, she was flustered and had no idea what to do. Am I going to die in the hands of a Dharma characteristic Tao Lord today? This desolate martial is truly detestable. Extremely detestable. Isn't there a third choice? In that moment of life and death, Rakshasa Yu's thoughts were completely messed up. Nobody wanted to die. At this point of her cultivation, if nothing went wrong, there was a high chance she would advance to the Mahayana realm and become a patriarch. She did not want to die here at all. However, Rakshasa Yu was indignant. Was she really going to have to submit to Desolate Martial? Rakshasa Yu's conviction had already begun to waver and she fell into immense pain with a conflicted expression. However, the purple flames in the martial Tao furnace did not have any intention of stopping and began to burn on her body. Desolate Martial, you're truly way too detestable. Rakshasa Yu shrieked. Desolate Martial was not even willing to give her any time to consider. Rakshasa Yu's eyes reddened and tears welled up in them. However, she was unyielding and refused to let them fall. Finally, she grit her teeth and said hatefully, I can submit, but I'll never betray the Rakshasa race or harm my clansmen. She was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and the bloodline of the Rakshasa flowed within her. That was her bottom line. Suddenly, Rakshasa Yu felt her body lighten and the sense of danger that her life was hanging on a thread had vanished. The purple flames that surrounded her initially had vanished as well. It was as though she had returned to that familiar world. The surroundings were no longer suffocating or scorching. The air was fresh. Not far away, the martial Tao prime body sat casually at a stone table and sipped tea leisurely with an indifferent expression. The tender and obedient child stood guard behind him quietly. Everything looked peaceful. Rakshasa Yu felt the joy of escaping a calamity. Even that extremely detestable person looked much more pleasing to the eye. However, she quickly realized her situation. Right now, she had already submitted to Desolate Martial. Theoretically speaking, the Dharma characteristic Tao Lord before her was her master. However, she could not bring herself to call him master. With a cold expression, Rakshasa Yu said in a deep voice, Desolate Martial, I'll submit to you but I won't call you master. As you wish. The martial Tao prime body said indifferently without being angered or forcing anything. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly, this was not the reaction she had expected. After a moment of silence she continued, Also, I'll definitely not do something like serving tea or pouring water. As you wish. That was still the martial Dao Prime Body's reply. Rakshasa Yu was stunned for a moment. Why did Desolate Martial suddenly become so easygoing? Immediately, she seemed to have thought of something and could not help but change her expression slightly. Clenching her fists tightly, she grit her teeth. Desolate Martial, don't even think of touching me. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, I'll definitely not betray my body. You're thinking too much. Rakshasa Yu was interrupted by the martial Dao Prime Body before she could finish. This time round, Rakshasa Yu was truly a little dazed. There was no need for her to call him master, pour him tea, offer her body or betray her clansmen. From the looks of it, there was nothing to lose by submitting to Desolate Martial. The moment that thought crossed her mind, Rakshasa Yu spat internally. The reason why she was in such a state was completely because of Desolate Martial. How could she have such thoughts? Rakshasa Yu shrugged her head and lamented internally, I must be confused because of the immense heat just now. Right then, the martial Dao Prime Body said slowly, I won't have any demands or restrictions on your freedom under normal circumstances. In fact, you can even challenge me at any time if you feel that you're strong enough. As long as you can defeat me, there's naturally no need for you to submit to me. When she heard that, Rakshasa Yu's eyes lit up as she asked, Are you serious? This was equivalent to giving her hope. As long as she could defeat Desolate Martial, she could break free from this shackle. You don't have to question my words. The martial Dao Prime Body said indifferently. What exactly do you want me to do then? Rakshasa Yu asked in a deep voice. The martial Dao Prime Body said, Make a move now and head to Ethereal Peak to guard it in secret. Kill anyone who trespasses into Ethereal Peak. That's all. Rakshasa Yu could not believe it. The reason why Desolate Martial wanted her to submit was because he wanted her to protect a sect. That's all. The martial Dao Prime Body nodded. Rakshasa Yu looked at the martial Dao Prime Body with a conflicted expression. She suddenly realized that she could not understand this person. A moment later, Rakshasa Yu suddenly asked, I want to know why you gave me a choice instead of killing me outright. There are two reasons. The martial Dao Prime Body said, First, you stopped that Rakshasa outside Pingyang town. Furthermore, you didn't kill any mortals. Second, the reason why I spared your life was because I wanted you to protect Ethereal Peak. That's all. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. That's all. The martial Dao Prime Body nodded. Rakshasa Yu harumphed coldly and turned to leave. For some reason, she felt an inexplicable sense of loss and frustration. Before long, she suddenly turned around and looked at the martial Dao Prime Body, sneering, Desolate Martial, I haven't even made a Dao oath. Aren't you afraid that I'll escape secretly? If you escape, I'll naturally capture you back. The tone of the martial Dao Prime Body was calm, but his words were unusually domineering. He's still as detestable as ever. Rakshasa Yu sneered internally and turned to leave. A gust of wind blew past and her figure vanished. Chapter 1487 Gathering of Half-Martial Ancestors. Chapter 1487 Gathering of Half-Martial Ancestors. Young master, we're letting her off just like that. Tao Yao turned his head slightly and asked in confusion. Of course, what else is there? The martial Dao Prime Body smiled. Will Rakshasa Yu expose the secret of your Prime Body? Tao Yao was worried. No. The martial Dao Prime Body shook his head. That woman is prideful. Since I gave her hope, she'll definitely obsess over it and hope to defeat me one day. Furthermore, the martial Dao Prime Body smiled gently. I left a martial spirit imprint on her essence spirit. If she's truly dishonest and has second thoughts, there's no need to keep her alive. The moment the martial Dao furnace refined Rakshasa Yu's bloodline phenomenon, the martial Dao Prime Body had already left that imprint. At that time, Rakshasa Yu's life was hanging by a thread and she was flustered, so she did not realize it at all. If the martial Dao Prime Body discovered anything unusual about Rakshasa Yu, her essence spirit would be burned to ashes by the martial spirit fire with a single thought. The methods of the martial Dao Prime Body were almost godly. Young master, why did you ask her to protect Ethereal Peak? Tao Yao thought for a moment and asked again, Is Ethereal Peak in any danger? I don't know. The martial Dao Prime Body shook his head. However, the Green Lotus True Body is cultivating in the Kunlun ruins and has not appeared for a long time. The Rakshasa race can't wait any longer and already has designs on Pingyang town. It won't be surprising for anyone to target Ethereal Peak. It's just a safety precaution. It'll be best if no one has any designs on Ethereal Peak. If anyone truly doesn't know what's good for them, Rakshasa Yu will be able to handle them given her strength. Rakshasa Yu was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and was at the conjoint body realm. However, even human half-martial ancestors might not be able to gain any advantage against her. Only the strongest half-martial ancestors of the human race could fight against her. Right now, Ethereal Peak could not even be considered as an upper sect. Even if anyone targeted Ethereal Peak, the strongest would only be conjoint body mighty figures or half-martial ancestor experts. Mahayana patriarchs were all in the advanced ancient battlefield. Who would waste time to come to the North region to do such a thing? Young master, I can help to protect Ethereal Peak as well. Tao Yao raised his head slightly and clenched his fists. For some reason, after the martial Dao prime body subdued Rakshasa Yu, Tao Yao felt that his status seemed to have been challenged. The martial Dao prime body smiled. You still have to protect me. Ah. Tao Yao was stunned. The martial Dao prime body still required protection. I'm about to break through. The martial Dao prime body said indifferently and stood up to head to his room. Tao Yao, I'll leave Pingyang town to you. 1. Don't worry, young master. Tao Yao agreed hurriedly. North Region Glass Palace. A middle-aged cultivator stood in front of a cave abode on an immortal mountain. He was tall and wore a glass Taoist robe that shone with a rainbow luster under the sunlight. It was extremely beautiful. The person stood in midair and shone with a divine light. He was like a god with a terrifying aura. Qinyu. He was a half-martial ancestor of Glass Palace. Qinyu's life was also a legend. When he was young, he experienced wars and lost his family, turning into an orphan child. Relying on the fact that he had a strong and tall figure from a tender age, coupled with his ruthless nature despite his youth, he gathered a group of people before long and lived off robbing others. Later on, a Dao Lord of Glass Palace appreciated his potential and he stepped onto the path of cultivation, soaring through the skies thereafter. Be it the Golden Core Phenomenon ranking or Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic ranking, Qinyu was one of the top 3 existences back then and was lauded as one of the strongest paragons of that generation. Before long. Suddenly, an auspicious cloud floated over from the distant skies. 4 figures rode on the cloud and their auras were not inferior to Qinyu. Another 4 half-martial ancestor experts. Ha 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 ha. Qinyu burst into laughter and rode the wind, taking the initiative to welcome them. Fellow Taoists, how have you been? The 4 half-martial ancestors came from different sections. The one in the middle was Chaos Essence Sect's half-martial ancestor D. Fan. Another person was skinny and had an indifferent expression. Standing there, he was like an unsheathed sword with a sharp killing intent. This was half-martial ancestor D. Ju of Sword Sect. The cultivator on the left had a square face and looked dignified as his body shone with faint lightning. He was half-martial ancestor Kong Shao of Zephyr Thunder Palace. The cultivator on the right wore a dark golden dermic robe with mysterious stars tattooed on it. This was from Heavenly Dipper Sect, half-martial ancestor Illumination. The 5 half-martial ancestor experts were considered notorious. In the cultivation world, every single one of them would attract countless gazes wherever they went. Furthermore, there were 5 half-martial ancestors gathered. Among the 5 half-martial ancestors, some of them were even paragons and monster incarnates of the same generation who had fought before. We've all been cultivating and comprehending the Tao of divine powers. Indeed, it's been a long time. D. Fan said in a deep voice, if Desolate Marshal hadn't appeared out of nowhere in this generation, the few of us probably wouldn't have been alarmed. However, we realized it too late. Half-martial ancestor Illumination of Heavenly Dipper Sect shook his head. I heard that in the battle at Enigma Palace, this lad's combat strength was torrential and even the Palace Lord of Enigma Palace was suppressed by him. This lad has already matured. Even if we join forces, we might not stand a chance of winning. Half-martial ancestor Kong Shao of Zephyr Thunder Palace sighed gently. Suddenly, Sword Sect's half-martial ancestor Diju sneered, if you guys are afraid, I alone am enough. Let's see if Desolate Marshal's heaven-slaying sword art is stronger or my earth-slaying sword art. Both half-martial ancestor Illumination and half-martial ancestor Kong Shao frowned. They were all half-martial ancestor experts and had similar reputations to half-martial ancestor Diju. Naturally, they could not hold it in any longer after being mocked by Diju. Alright, this rare gathering is to deal with Desolate Marshal. Don't fight among ourselves first and let others laugh at us. Chinyu tried to smooth things over. Half-Martial Ancestor Diju still had a disdainful expression. The earth-slaying sword art had always been in Sword Sect. However, that sword art was difficult to comprehend and cultivate. Throughout history there were very few people who could cultivate that sword art. In order to increase the combat strength of Sword Sect cultivators, the Sword Emperor used the earth-slaying sword art as a foundation and deduced the lifeless sword art. The cultivation of the lifeless sword art was relatively simple compared to it. Of course, its power was far inferior to the earth-slaying sword art as well. Half-Martial Ancestor Diju indeed had the right to be proud. If a life-and-death battle were to break out, he would be the one most likely to survive among the 5 of them. Half-Martial Ancestor Diju did not have any deep feud with Su Zimo. He only had a single goal for coming out of seclusion, the Heaven-Slaying Sword Art in Su Zimo's possession. If he could obtain the Heaven-Slaying Sword Art, he would definitely be able to advance to the Mahayana realm smoothly and his future potential would be unimaginable. Everyone, the main reason why we're heading to Ethereal Peak is to force Desolate Marshal to appear. D. Fan said in a deep voice, "From the information I gathered, Desolate Marshal is an extremely loyal person. If he knew about this, he would definitely barge in foolishly even if he knew that it was a trap." That's a good plan. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination nodded. Once Desolate Marshal appears, even if we can't defeat him with our joined forces, experts of the primordial 6 races will definitely be able to lock him down. 1. At that time, Desolate Marshal will definitely die. Chapter 1488 Too Noisy. Chapter 1488 Too Noisy. More than 100 years ago, Su Zimo came out of seclusion and entered the Dharma characteristic realm. All the upper sect masters of the North region came to pay their respects. Thereafter, Su Zimo destroyed Dragon Tiger sect and left all their cultivation techniques and secret skills in Ethereal Peak. In Dragon Tiger sect, Su Zimo obtained many high-level elixirs, Tao Lord Dermic weapons and a large number of spirit stones from the sect masters of the upper sects. Later on, when Monk Yuan Bei passed away, Su Zimo shifted all the ancient books at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley to Ethereal Peak. With such a massive amount of cultivation resources and rich cultivation techniques and secret skills, the many cultivators of Ethereal Peak experienced a massive boost to their cultivation realms and their overall strength. What Ethereal Peak obtained was not only the foundation and resources of Dragon Tiger sect, but also the resources of Daming Monastery and Fahua Monastery. After more than 100 years, the old immortal crane broke through once more and entered the conjoint body realm. As for Ethereal Peak sect master Ling Yun, he was already a Dharma characteristic Tao Lord. The 5 peak masters of the past, Shen Yi, Lu Hui and the others, were even at the void reversion realm. Over the years, due to the sect's rise and cultivation techniques and secret skills of super sects such as Daming and Fahua monasteries, there were even some Dharma characteristic Tao Lords and conjoint body mighty figures who were attracted to join the sect. Including Nian Qi, Ethereal Peak's current strength and foundation was similar to the 108 upper sects. This day, 5 people arrived above Ethereal Peak. The 5 of them descended and stood in 5 different directions, surrounding the massive Ethereal Peak in the middle. "Who's there?" The cultivator guarding the entrance shouted. "Umph." Among the 5 of them, a cold and sharp cultivator was motionless. However, a bright glint flashed through his eyes. The cultivator guarding the mountain gate was sliced into 2 instantly and his blood splattered on the spot, dying. As a half-martial ancestor, a single gaze was enough for Diju to kill a Foundation establishment cultivator. Clang, clang, clang. A warning bell sounded from Ethereal Peak. Many cultivators appeared and looked towards the skies. The old immortal crane, Ling Yun, Shen Yi and the others came forth one after another as well. This aura. The old immortal crane's expression changed starkly as she looked at the 5 figures in midair. Half-martial ancestors. A conjoint body mighty figure at the side exclaimed with a pale expression. The shout caused a commotion in Ethereal Peak. In the hearts of most Ethereal Peak cultivators, half-martial ancestor experts were legendary existences and were worlds apart from them. To think that they would see them today. Furthermore, 5 of them had appeared all of a sudden. The most terrifying thing was that the 5 half-martial ancestors were clearly hostile and murderous. Against the might of the 5 half-martial ancestors, the 5 peaks of Ethereal Peak could not hold on any longer and cracks appeared on the mountains. Although the old immortal crane did not recognize the 5 half-martial ancestors, she understood when she saw their sect emblems. Sword Sect, Chaos Essence Sect and Zephyr Thunder Palace. All of those super sects had extremely deep grudges with Suzimo. The 5 half-martial ancestor experts must have come for Desolate Martial. Against the might of half-martial ancestors, a mighty figure of Ethereal Peak had a horrified expression and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, 5 half-martial ancestors. Desolate Martial is not in Ethereal Peak, That's not important." D-Fan interrupted the conjoint body mighty figure with a cold expression and said indifferently, "Desolate Martial came from Ethereal Peak, that's all that matters. Now that we're here, the tens of thousands of cultivators from Ethereal Peak can dream about leaving alive." A single sentence from a half-martial ancestor was equivalent to declaring the death penalty for everyone from Ethereal Peak. The old immortal crane felt bitter. Even though she had cultivated to the conjoint body realm, she could not defeat the might of a half-martial ancestor. Against absolute strength, she still had no way of resisting. Please spare me, senior." A few mighty figures of Ethereal Peak knelt down and begged with horrified expressions. "It's not my fault," D-Fan said coldly. "The fault is that you guys shouldn't have joined Ethereal Peak or gotten involved with Desolate Martial. We joined Ethereal Peak later on and have never seen Desolate Martial before. We have nothing to do with Desolate Martial or Ethereal Peak." The mighty figures defended desperately. "Cut the crap with them." Diju sneered and waved his sleeves. Instantly, a few sword chi burst forth at an extremely fast speed and entered the glabellas of the mighty figures right in front of their eyes. These mighty figures of Ethereal Peak let go of their dignity and everything else as they begged for mercy. However, they did not expect that they would be the first to die. Not to mention that Diju was a half-martial ancestor expert. Even if Diju was at the conjoint body realm, the few mighty figures could not defend against the slash. The old immortal crane shook her head gently. When Ethereal Peak was on the brink of danger, these few mighty figures did not hesitate and tried their best to sever their relationship with Ethereal Peak. There was no pity in the old immortal crane's heart for their deaths. "Activate!" the old immortal crane shouted. Shen Yi and the others were long prepared as dermic powers burst forth from their fingertips, entering every single corner of Ethereal Peak. Buzz. The formation patterns lit up. Ethereal Peak's sect protection formation had already been activated. "How dare you take out such an array formation in front of us? How ignorant!" Half-martial ancestor Kong Shao sneered and extended his palm, pointing at the firmaments. Instantly, dark clouds filled the skies of Ethereal Peak. Snap! A gigantic thunderbolt descended and struck Ethereal Peak's sect protection formation. Crack, crack, crack. Cracks appeared on the sect protection formation and it shattered under the despaired gazes of many Ethereal Peak cultivators. The sect protection formation could not even defend against a casual attack from half-martial ancestor Kong Shao. The old immortal crane sighed. The difference was too great. Even she was merely an ant in the eyes of the 5 half-martial ancestors, let alone the other cultivators of Ethereal Peak. She could be crushed with ease. "Don't worry." D-Fan smiled gently. "We won't kill all of you in a day. We'll kill you slowly. Only half will be killed today. We'll kill another half tomorrow. I'll spread the news. As long as Desolate Martial is still in Tianhuang Mainland, he'll definitely know." Everyone from Ethereal Peak had dejected expressions. The 5 half-martial ancestors exchanged glances and chuckled. "The 5 of you are too noisy. Can you scram further?" Suddenly, a voice sounded from Ethereal Peak. It was a woman's voice that was extremely pleasant to listen to. However, there was a deep hint of impatience and disgust in her tone. Everyone from Ethereal Peak was stunned and looked over instinctively. Someone among them dared to speak rudely to a half-martial ancestor. D-Fan and the others shifted their gazes and locked onto a woman at the same time. The woman walked out from the crowd slowly. She was at the conjoint body realm and was a head taller than the people around her. Her skin was fair as snow and she was extremely beautiful with a hint of foreign charm in her eyes. D-Fan and the others frowned slightly. Although this woman looked no different from a human, they had lived for more than 10,000 years and could sense that something was amiss. The old immortal crane was stunned as well. That was because she had never seen this woman before. More than that, she did not know when this woman arrived here. Chapter 1489 Wrath of Rakshasa. Chapter 1489, Wrath of Rakshasa. Given Rakshasa capabilities, it was way too easy for her to hide from the old immortal crane and everyone from Ethereal Peak. The martial Dao Prime body wanted her to guard in secret. Therefore she did not expose her tracks. To think that the detestable person had guessed correctly, there were indeed people here to cause trouble for Ethereal Peak. Rakshasa suffered a huge loss in the hands of the martial Dao Prime body and was even taken advantage of. She had long been fuming internally. Even though she was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, she was stuck in Ethereal Peak during this period of time, unable to show her face or speak to anyone. As such, she could not vent her frustrations. Furthermore, the more she thought about it, the more aggrieved she felt. Today, D-Fan and the others had come knocking on their own. She had finally found someone to vent her frustrations on. "You're not human." Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination narrowed his eyes and suddenly said. "So what if I'm not?" Rakshasa sneered. "I'm pretty pissed off right now. Since the 5 of you came knocking on your own, I have no choice but to kill all of you." Half-Martial Ancestor Kong Xiao swept his gaze across Rakshasa brazenly and smiled. "Fairy, there's no need to get angry. If you agree to submit to me today, I can make the decision to protect you." 1. The word, submit, triggered Rakshasa instantly. Right now, the most unendurable word for her to listen to was, submit. Ah. Suddenly, Rakshasa shrieked as though she had gone mad. "You shameless old dog. You truly have a death wish." Swoosh. Suddenly, her figure vanished from the spot. The old immortal crane was not far away. However, she merely blinked her eye and Rakshasa had already vanished. Furthermore, she could not detect Rakshasa at all. It was too fast. The old immortal crane was shocked. Half-Martial Ancestor Kong Xiao's heart skipped a beat as well. Although he had lustful thoughts of subduing Rakshasa, he was a half-martial ancestor expert who had been famous for a long time after all and had always been wary. The moment Rakshasa vanished, he tore a talisman and retreated. At the same time, a cold beam slashed heavily above half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao's head. Snap. The protection talisman that half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao had just conjured shattered instantly. This time round, half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao broke out in cold sweat. If he had reacted slightly slower and had not conjured his protection talisman, that cold light would have taken his life. It's the Rakshasa race. The moment Rakshasa attacked, the 5 half-martial ancestors recognized her identity and background at the same time. "Fellow Taoists, help." Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao shouted hurriedly, "This female Rakshasa is troublesome to deal with." Without his reminder, the 4 half-martial ancestors, D-Fan, D-Ju, Qin-Yu and Illumination, had already attacked one after another and charged towards Rakshasa. Good. When Rakshasa saw the 5 half-martial ancestors approaching, she was even more enraged and said coldly, "The 5 of you truly don't know what's good for you. How dare you surround me? Kill?" She channeled her bloodline and wielded curved sabers. With her terrifying movement speed, she shuttled through the 5 half-martial ancestors. Great Chaos Essence Palm. Earth-Slaying Sword Chi. Heavenly Thunder Manual. Rainbow Glass Body. Radiant Sunlight. The 5 half-martial ancestors released terrifying dermic arts that tore through the air. Each dermic art contained a trace of divine power. Instantly the weather changed. Rakshasa figure was completely restricted. Under normal circumstances, given Rakshasa combat strength, she could definitely kill a human half-martial ancestor. However, the 5 people before her were the strongest paragons of the human half-martial ancestors. Even Rakshasa felt immense pressure when the 5 of them joined forces. However, the pressure intensified the rage in her heart. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, she carried the reputation and dignity of the entire Rakshasa race. She had already lost once and did not want to lose a second time. Boom. Rakshasa channeled her bloodline wildly and the deafening sound of a tsunami could be heard from her body. However, that was not the end of it. Rakshasa aura was still rising rapidly. Right in front of countless gazes, the figures of 5 Rakshasa women appeared behind Rakshasa, exuding a powerful might. Bloodline phenomenon. The 5 half-martial ancestors frowned slightly. Those who could cultivate a bloodline phenomenon were all monster incarnates. Kill? Rakshasa Yu pointed forward and the 5 Rakshasa women attacked one after another. Wielding 2 sabers, they charged towards the 5 half-martial ancestors. As for Rakshasa Yu, she had already targeted half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao and attacked wildly. The power of the bloodline phenomenon intensified the pressure on the 5 half-martial ancestors. Fan's expression changed indeterminately as he suddenly shouted, "As a Rakshasa, you clearly have a deep feud with Desolate Marshal. Yet, you're protecting Ethereal Peak that's related to Desolate Marshal. If the Rakshasa clan leader and young master knew about this, you would definitely be severely punished." Rakshasa Yu sneered, "I'm the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. I'm Rakshasa Yu." The expressions of the 5 half-martial ancestors changed. If it was just an ordinary Rakshasa, it would have been fine if the 5 of them killed her. However, the person before him was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. That identity was way too sensitive. The 5 half-martial ancestors did not say anything, but there was a hint of fear in their eyes. When Desolate Marshal killed the young master of the Bloodvine race, they set the killing badge on him. Even until now, he was hiding somewhere and did not dare to reveal himself. If they killed Rakshasa Yu, they would be met with a calamity as well. With that thought, the 5 half-martial ancestors became cautious. Both parties were in a stalemate to begin with, and it was hard to tell who was stronger. Right now, one party was cautious and fearful. However, the other party released the most terrifying attacks as though she had gone mad. In the blink of an eye, the situation half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao was facing changed drastically. Fan, Ju, Qin Yu and Illumination exchanged glances and made a decision at the same time with a tacit understanding: retreat. With Rakshasa Yu here today, no matter how they fought today, nothing would come out of it. If they were careless, they might even be killed by Rakshasa Yu here. If it was a one-on-one fight, none of them were a match for Rakshasa Yu. Swash, swash, swash. Fan and the others released another dermic art. After bluffing, they released their escape techniques and fled in 4 different directions. Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao had long realized the plans of Fan and the others as well and did not dare to linger. Streaks of lightning appeared on his body. Wild winds howled and half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao released Zephyr Thunder escape without turning to flee. "Old dog, you're still thinking of escaping?" Rakshasa Yu did not have clone techniques and could not be bothered with the others. Her target was half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao alone. No matter how fast Zephyr Thunder escape was, he could not match the Rakshasa race. In a dozen breaths, Rakshasa Yu had already caught up and slashed forward with her curved sabers. Apocalyptic Rakshasa slash. 2 saber beams descended with a terrifying aura. Sensing danger, half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao knew that he could not escape. He could only pause and throw out a gigantic shield in front of him. Clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao shuddered. The 2 saber beams penetrated the half-martial ancestor dermic weapon and entered his body, releasing a destructive power that could destroy all life. Crown of the Eternal Realm. Chapter 1490 Turning to Pingyang Town. Chapter 1490, Turning to Pingyang Town. Boom. The body of half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao exploded instantly and flesh splattered everywhere. The blood of the half-martial ancestor dyed half the skies red. Swoosh. As the blood mist surged, an essence spirit fled into the distance with a panicked expression. In a flash, Rakshasa Yu scooped and captured half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao's essence spirit in her palm. She said coldly, "Old dog, didn't you want me to submit? Are you even worthy?" She did not give half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao any chance to beg for mercy and stuffed his essence spirit into her mouth, swallowing it. Right in front of everyone from Ethereal Peak, a half-martial ancestor was killed by Rakshasa Yu. The eyes of the Ethereal Peak cultivators nearly popped out. Such a beautiful woman was so powerful and violent that she devoured the essence spirit of a half-martial ancestor. The remaining 4 half-martial ancestors were also beaten away by this powerful woman. Rakshasa Yu's spirit consciousness moved and extended hundreds of thousands of kilometers instantly. However, Fan and the other 3 half-martial ancestors had already escaped from the range of her spirit consciousness and vanished. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. If she were to chase after them now, it would be difficult for her to catch up to Fan and the other 3. Furthermore, if she were to leave Ethereal Peak, Ethereal Peak would be met with a great calamity if any other strong foes were to arrive. After pondering for a moment, Rakshasa Yu decided to guard Ethereal Peak and did not leave. Although the battle was short, Rakshasa Yu finally managed to quell the frustrations in her heart after killing a half-martial ancestor. I heard that everyone from the Rakshasa race are all extremely ugly. Why is Rakshasa Yu so beautiful? She's even prettier than senior sister Shui Yun. I wonder. I even heard that the Rakshasa race is extremely violent and bloodthirsty. Why would they help us? Could there be good people in the Rakshasa race as well? Many cultivators of Ethereal Peak discussed softly. The old immortal crane had already walked forward and bowed to Rakshasa Yu. Thank you for your assistance, young mistress of the Rakshasa race. Ethereal Peak is extremely grateful. The old immortal crane had a terrible impression of the Rakshasa race. However, Rakshasa Yu had helped Ethereal Peak tide through this calamity after all. No matter what, she had to express her thanks personally. It's nothing much. Rakshasa Yu waved it off. If it was any other time, she would not have bothered to speak to an ant like the old immortal crane. However, she had just killed a half-martial ancestor and felt much better after venting the anger in her chest. Pardon me for being bold, senior. May I know why you're in Ethereal Peak and why you're helping us? The old immortal crane could not help but ask, puzzled. At the mention of that, a refined face appeared in Rakshasa Yu's mind and she grit her teeth in anger. It's because of an extremely detestable person. Rakshasa Yu said hatefully. Ah. The old immortal crane was slightly stunned. Rakshasa Yu shifted her gaze to the old immortal crane and suddenly asked, I heard that Desolate Marshal came from Ethereal Peak. In that case, do you know Desolate Marshal's past very well? The old immortal crane could not understand how Rakshasa Yu's thoughts could leap onto Desolate Marshal right away and merely nodded her head. I know a little. All right, come over and explain everything to me carefully. Rakshasa Yu said and turned towards a cave abode. The old immortal crane was puzzled but still followed. Under normal circumstances, the Rakshasa race and Desolate Marshal were irreconcilable. Rakshasa Yu should hate Desolate Marshal to the core. However, for some reason the old immortal crane could not sense it. On the contrary, Rakshasa Yu seemed to be curious about Desolate Marshal. 50,000 kilometers away from Ethereal Peak in midair. Fan, Ju, Chenyu and Illumination gathered together once more with ugly expressions and a hint of embarrassment. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination said, seems like Kong Shao is dead. Damn it. Half-Martial Ancestor Chenyu could not help but curse, why is there a crazy woman in Ethereal Peak? What I don't understand is why the young mistress of the Rakshasa race would interfere and protect everyone from Ethereal Peak. Fan frowned. Could the Rakshasa race have some deeper plan? Did Rakshasa Yu attack us because our appearance disrupted their plans? Half-Martial Ancestor Ju harumphed coldly. If not for the fact that she's the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, I would have killed her a long time ago. How unlucky. Half-Martial Ancestor Chenyu spat as well. As a half-martial ancestor of Glass Palace, he had a strong physique and bloodline and was best at melee combat. Rakshasa Yu's movement technique was extremely fast and he could not gain any advantage against her. Instead, she slashed a few wounds on his body. The four of them were furious. The trip to Ethereal Peak was completely different from what they had expected. Not only did they fail to destroy Ethereal Peak, half-martial ancestor Kong Shao was killed by Rakshasa Yu who appeared out of nowhere. The four of them were even disgraced and returned in defeat. Let's head back. We won't stand a chance with that crazy woman in Ethereal Peak. A moment later, half-martial ancestor Illumination said. That's the only way. Half-martial ancestor Chenyu nodded as well. Ju's expression was cold and he said nothing. It was clear that he was indignant. Suddenly, half-martial ancestor Fan asked, Everyone, are you willing to return empty-handed after traveling thousands of kilometers? So what if we're indignant? Half-martial ancestor Illumination shook his head. Ethereal Peak is protected by the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and Desolate Marshal has disappeared for 20 years. There's nothing we can do even if we stay in the north region. There's another place. Fan smirked as he said slowly with a cold glint in his eyes, Pingyang Town. Pingyang Town. The other three half-martial ancestors frowned. Fan explained, over the years I've gathered a lot of information about Desolate Marshal. Pingyang Town is Desolate Marshal's hometown. Is there anything strange about Pingyang Town? Half-Martial Ancestor Qinyu asked. Fan shook his head. Not really. However, the mortals inside have a longer lifespan. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination frowned. Ever since Desolate Martial started cultivating, he has already severed ties with the mortal world. They're mere mortals, what do they have to do with Desolate Martial? No. Fan said in a deep voice, there must be something fishy about how Pingyang Town is able to remain peaceful and safe in this chaotic era. Furthermore, Desolate Martial is loyal and sentimental. I heard that the corpses of his kin and his childhood sweetheart are buried in Pingyang Town. Two half-martial ancestors, Qinyu and Illumination, shrugged their shoulders in disapproval. In their opinion, everything was long in the past and had nothing to do with Desolate Martial anymore. This time round, we 5 half-martial ancestors came out. If we return just like that, we'll truly be worthless. However, half-martial ancestor Diju suddenly said, let's go to Pingyang Town. Kill everyone there and spare no one. Also, find Desolate Martial's ancestral tomb. I'm going to dig out the corpses of his kin and burn them into ashes. Everyone knew that half-martial ancestor Diju had a pent-up frustration in his heart after the setback of Ethereal Peak and wanted to vent it out. The mortals of Pingyang Town could only consider themselves unlucky. Half-martial ancestor Qinyu and half-martial ancestor Illumination had no objections either. After all, in their eyes it was nothing much to kill some mere mortals. Chapter 1491, You guys came at the right time. Chapter 1491, You guys came at the right time. Pingyang Town. In a quiet residence, the door creaked open and a handsome man in purple robes walked out with a calm expression. Young master, you're out of seclusion. Tao Yao welcomed him. In his eyes, the martial Dao prime body seemed to have changed and there was an indescribable aura around him. Young master, you've already entered the conjoint body realm. Tao Yao asked again with a delighted expression. Yes. The martial Dao prime body nodded. Entering the conjoint body realm was much more difficult and dangerous than he had imagined. There had never been anyone who could condense a heaven and earth Dharma characteristic that was 100 feet tall throughout history. The path of the martial Dao prime body could only be explored by him. After fusing with the peerless Dharma characteristic, the body of the martial Dao prime body nearly collapsed countless times and turned into nothingness. Thankfully, he managed to survive in the end and entered the conjoint body realm to become a mighty figure. Right then, the martial Dao prime body sensed something and his expression changed as he turned to look into the distance. What's wrong, young master? Tao Yao asked curiously when he saw the odd expression on the martial Dao prime body's face. Someone's here. The martial Dao prime body shook his head gently with a mocking gaze. To think that a mere Pingyang town filled with mortals would be able to attract half-martial ancestors. Half-martial ancestor experts are here. Tao Yao's heart skipped a beat. The martial Dao prime body had already said it, but he still could not sense any traces of any half-martial ancestor expert. Although they were both at the conjoint body realm, the senses of the martial Dao prime body had far surpassed Tao Yao. Young master, I'll go bash them up. Tao Yao raised his fist. There's no need. The martial Dao prime body smiled faintly. Coincidentally, there are some grudges that can be resolved today. Right then Tao Yao exclaimed softly, I can sense them. What a powerful aura. The 4 of them are not easy to deal with. Tao Yao could sense that the 4 half-martial ancestors were extremely fast. In less than 10 breaths, they had already arrived in the skies of Pingyang Town. Mortals of Pingyang Town, listen up. Half-martial ancestor Diju had a cold expression as he looked down and said indifferently, all of you are very unlucky. All of you have to die today. Your luck isn't good either. 1. Right then a calm voice sounded from a residence. MMM? There was someone in Pingyang Town who dared to challenge a half-martial ancestor. The gazes of Fan and the other 3 shifted towards the voice. When they saw the person in the courtyard, Fan and the other 3 were stunned on the spot with disbelief in their eyes. That person. Desolate Martial. Fan was the first to react and shouted. The other 3 had only seen a drawing of Su Zimo. However, Fan could recognize Su Zimo right away because he saw the latter in real life after trying to kill the latter twice personally. So, you're hiding here. Qinyu's gaze intensified. Initially, the 4 of them merely wanted to take a walk around Pingyang Town and kill the mortals there to vent their anger. To think that he would bump into Su Zimo in Pingyang town. Swish. In a flash, half-martial Ancestor Diju arrived above the residence of the martial Dao Prime body right away. His gaze was sharp, even sharper than sword lights. Everyone, the target is right here. Let's not let him escape. Half-martial Ancestor Diju said slowly. Something doesn't seem right. Di Fan frowned and scanned the martial Dao Prime body. This person was identical to Desolate Martial. However, for some reason, Di Fan felt an unusual aura from the martial Dao Prime body. Even he felt his heart skip a beat from that aura. However, half-martial Ancestor Illumination and half-martial Ancestor Chenyu still descended above the residence and formed an encirclement with half-martial Ancestor Diju. Desolate Martial. Half-martial Ancestor Chenyu grinned. I heard that you wreaked havoc in Enigma Palace with torrential combat strength and even suppressed the Palace Lord of Enigma Palace. Let's see what you can do today. Half-martial Ancestor Illumination said, Desolate Martial, your cultivation hasn't improved at all in the past 20 years. To think that you're still at the early stage conjoint body realm. Half-martial Ancestor Illumination relaxed slightly. Thankfully, Desolate Martial's cultivation did not advance. Desolate Martial, hand over the heaven-slaying sword art and I can leave you with a full corpse. Half-martial Ancestor Diju said coldly. Oh. The gaze of the martial Dao Prime body shifted and swept across half-martial Ancestor Diju. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he murmured, what a powerful sword chi and rich killing intent. The sword chi and killing intent were similar to the heaven-slaying sword chi, but there was an obvious difference. Seems like you've cultivated the earth-slaying sword art. The martial Dao Prime body smiled gently and nodded. You came at the right time. You saved me the trouble of looking for you. You're after my earth-slaying sword art? Half-martial Ancestor Diju could tell what the martial Dao Prime body meant and his expression turned even colder. The martial Dao Prime body no longer looked at half-martial Ancestor Diju. He turned to Di Fan and said slowly, Old dog Di Fan, as a half-martial ancestor, you tried to kill me twice. You came at the right time today as well. Before his sentence was finished, the martial Dao Prime body stood up and stomped on the ground gently. Swoosh. Instantly, barriers rose within the residence, isolating the place from Pingyang town. Di Fan and the other three were shocked and summoned their destiny dermic weapons right away. Half-martial Ancestor Chenyu took out a pair of gigantic astral hammers from his storage bag. The pair of astral hammers were made completely from stars that fell from the skies. Each of them was extremely heavy and could crush a mountain with ease. I've long heard that Desolate Martial is invincible in melee combat. I'll test out whether you're truly capable or nothing but an empty shell. Half-martial Ancestor Chenyu hollered and channeled his blood chi, reaching the tsunami blood realm instantly. Tuck, tuck, tuck. He charged towards the martial Dao Prime body with huge strides. With every step he took, the entire world would tremble. In just 3 strides, half-martial Ancestor Chenyu had already arrived before the martial Dao Prime body. After those 3 strides, half-martial Ancestor Chenyu's aura had already reached its limits. Take my hammers. Half-martial Ancestor Chenyu's voice was like a bell as he swung the astral hammers in his hands and smashed it towards the head of the martial Dao Prime body. The astral hammers were many times larger than the body of the martial Dao Prime body. A large shadow enveloped down as though the sky was collapsing. Attack. At the same time, Di Fan shouted softly. Dermic powers surged within his body and he extended his palm through the void. It was as though a gigantic millstone was formed in midair and crushed towards the martial Dao Prime body. Great Chaos Essence Palm. Radiant Sunlight. Half-martial Ancestor Illumination conjured hand seals with both hands and a blinding light seemed to be formed from a blazing sun. There were countless beams of light. Every single beam of light possessed a terrifying energy that could penetrate a conjoint body mighty figure's body. When the Earth's killing intent is released, the dragon snake shall rise. Half-martial Ancestor Diju chanted softly and closed his sword finger, slashing gently at the martial Dao Prime body. Swoosh. Endless sword chi gathered instantly, forming a gigantic sword. It was ferocious and seemed like it wanted to pierce a hole in the firmaments as it descended with a terrifying might. The sword descended like a divine dragon and looked down at the world, as though it wanted to slice everything before it into nothingness. Chapter 1492 Desolate Martial's Prime Body. Chapter 1492, Desolate Marshal's Prime Body. The attacks of the 4 half-martial ancestors were terrifying. However, the expression of the martial Dao Prime Body did not change at all and was frighteningly calm. If the 4 half-martial ancestors had joined forces when he was at the Dharma characteristic realm, they would indeed have caused him some trouble. However, now that he was at the conjoined body realm, the attacks of Defan and the other 3 were nothing in his eyes. Boom, boom, boom. The martial Dao Prime Body channeled his bloodline as well and reached the Tsunami Blood realm right away. Although it was the same Tsunami Blood, the blood chi of the martial Dao Prime Body surged. It was majestic and emitted a scorching heat. It was as though a gigantic volcano was surging within the body of the martial Dao Prime Body. The terrifying lava almost drowned half-martial ancestor Qinyu. The blood chi of half-martial ancestor Qinyu was completely suppressed by the martial Dao Prime Body. Against the attacks of the 4 half-martial ancestors, the martial Dao Prime Body was in no hurry. He punched in reverse towards the astral hammers that descended from midair. Desolate Martial, you're truly arrogant. To think that you would dare to receive my half-martial ancestor dermic weapon barehanded. It's like striking a stone. Before half-martial ancestor Qinyu could finish his sentence, a deafening bang sounded from the battlefield. Boom. The fist of the martial Dao Prime Body collided heavily against Qinyu's half-martial ancestor dermic weapon, the astral hammers. That scene looked a little ridiculous. As half-martial ancestor Qinyu had said, this was akin to striking a stone with an egg. However, it was different from what he had imagined. His astral hammers were not the stone. The fist of the martial Dao Prime Body was the indestructible stone. After a loud bang, half-martial ancestor Qinyu shuddered and his eyes widened in disbelief. He felt a terrifying power that surged like the sea and was as violent as fire surge into the astral hammers. He could not withstand that power at all. Half-martial ancestor Qinyu's palm was torn instantly and fresh blood dripped. The flesh on his entire arm exploded into a blood mist, let alone his palm. The astral hammers flew out of his hands. At the same time, the martial Dao Prime Body extended his other palm and grabbed the gigantic sword formed by the earth-slaying sword chi that was slashing down from midair. You must have a death wish. Half-martial ancestor Diju said coldly. Snap. The martial Dao Prime Body grabbed the gigantic earth-slaying sword that resembled a divine dragon and sliced it into 2. He threw it on the ground and the sword chi dissipated. At the same time, the martial Dao Prime Body flicked in reverse without even turning back. Clang. A metallic sound echoed sinisterly from the battlefield. Another sword chi dissipated. Finally, the expression of half-martial ancestor Diju changed. When the earth's killing intent is released, the dragon snake shall rise. The earth-slaying sword chi that he released actually contained 2 moves. One of them was the gigantic sword that resembled a divine dragon that slashed down. The other move was a slithering sword chi that was like a snake that stabbed towards the martial Dao Prime Body silently. This was the true killing move of the earth-slaying sword art. Over the years, there were extremely few cultivators who could defend against the gigantic divine dragon sword. Even if they could defend against the gigantic divine dragon sword, nobody could escape from the killing power of the snake sword chi. However, half-martial ancestor Diju had not expected that the martial Dao Prime Body would destroy the earth-slaying sword art with a casual punch and finger flick. The earth-slaying sword art is truly worthless in your hands. The martial Dao Prime Body sneered. The reason why he could destroy half-martial ancestor Diju's earth-slaying sword chi with ease was because his body was incomparably strong to begin with. It was also because half-martial ancestor Diju had not comprehended the essence of the earth-slaying sword art at all. What radiant sunlight! It's worthless. Suddenly, the martial Dao Prime Body hollered, "Extinguish!" His body was like a martial Dao furnace and the martial spirit fire burned continuously. The sudden roar that was released was even more terrifying than any sound domain secret skill. Crack, crack, crack. The blazing sun that was just conjured in half-martial ancestor Illumination's hands began to crack and its dermic powers drained, dissipating completely in the blink of an eye. A single roar from the martial Dao Prime Body destroyed the dermic art of half-martial ancestor Illumination. It was only then that the martial Dao Prime Body turned to look at the descending Great Chaos Essence Palm. Great Chaos Essence Palm? The martial Dao Prime Body nodded slightly. This secret skill is not bad. The martial Dao Prime Body did not make any motions and punched. Boom, boom, The millstone-like palm in midair exploded and its dermic powers dissipated. The four half-martial ancestors had ashen expressions. The strength of the martial Tao prime body had far surpassed their imagination. In fact, he was much stronger than Desolate Marshal in the battle at Enigma Palace in their impression of him. The purple-robed Desolate Marshal did not even use any dermic weapons and looked calm. He destroyed their dermic weapons, dermic arts and secret skills with his bare hands. Something's not right. As though he realized something, Fan suddenly exclaimed, "You're not Desolate Marshal. This body of yours is definitely not the Green Lotus true body. You're not a Dragon Phoenix either. Who are you? Even a grade 7 creation Green Lotus doesn't have such power." The Martial Tao Prime Body smiled. "You're right. The Desolate Marshal in front of Enigma Palace and the Desolate Marshal of the Dragon race were merely true bodies that I cultivated. What you're looking at right now is my actual Prime Body, Desolate Marshal's Prime Body." The words, Desolate Marshal's Prime Body, crushed the confidence of the four half-martial ancestors completely. 3 true bodies. Desolate Marshal had 3 true bodies. The 2 true bodies that appeared in the cultivation world earlier on were not Desolate Marshal's strongest strength. At the thought of this, Fan and the other 3 felt chills run down their spines. The Green Lotus true body and Dragon Phoenix true body alone almost turned the entire Tianhuang mainland upside down. What would things be like if this prime body of Desolate Marshal were to appear? Fan and the other 3 did not dare to continue thinking. Escape. The 4 of them did not even have to communicate and turned to flee with a tacit understanding. Among them, Fan even took out a major transference talisman from his storage bag and tore it apart, wanting to teleport and leave this place. However, the Martial Tao Prime Body had already sealed the space before the battle. It was impossible for half-martial ancestor Ju and the others to dispel the barrier within a short period of time. Even the major transference talisman was useless. The Martial Tao Prime Body strode forward and arrived behind half-martial ancestor Qinyu in the blink of an eye. He raised his fist and punched down viciously. Ah! Sensing danger, half-martial ancestor Qinyu roared and his face turned purple. A ruthless glint flashed through half-martial ancestor Qinyu's eyes as he swung his arm and waved his other astral hammer. He ignored the incoming fist of the Martial Tao Prime Body and smashed it towards the latter's head. This was an internecine outcome and a fight to the death. The Martial Tao Prime Body ignored half-martial ancestor Qinyu's astral hammer and continued smashing down. He punched half-martial ancestor Qinyu on the head. At the same time, the astral hammer smashed onto the head of the Martial Tao Prime Body. Half-martial ancestor Qinyu's head was shattered by a punch from the Martial Tao Prime Body and his essence spirit was destroyed, dying on the spot. However, the Martial Tao Prime Body was completely unharmed. The astral hammer could not break his body either. The Martial Tao Prime Body did not have dermic weapons. His body was his strongest dermic weapon. Chapter 1493 Killing with Open Eyes. Chapter 1493, Killing with Open Eyes. Half-martial ancestor Qinyu was killed by a punch from the Martial Tao Prime Body. When they saw that, Fan and the other 2 were even more scared out of their wits with terrible expressions. Ever since they became half-martial ancestors, they had never felt such a danger with their lives on the line. Mahayana patriarchs comprehended divine powers in the advanced ancient battlefield and would not appear casually. Half-martial ancestors were the strongest existences in Tianhuang mainland. Furthermore, they were the strongest paragons of the half-martial ancestors. Who could threaten them? But today, when the 3 of them saw half-martial ancestor Qinyu being hammered to death by Desolate Marshal's punch, they felt their scalps tingle as though they were witnessing their deaths. Bang! 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 Fan and the other 2 attacked the surrounding barrier wildly, wanting to break free from the restraints and rush out of this space. "Why are you guys struggling needlessly?" The Martial Tao Prime Body said indifferently, "Even if you can break through the spatial barrier here, you won't be able to escape my pursuit." Those words destroyed the last hope in the hearts of Fan and the other 2. The 3 of them could not help but question themselves internally if they would be caught by Desolate Marshal's Prime Body even if they managed to escape. Just as the 3 of them were slightly distracted, the Martial Tao Prime Body arrived before half-martial ancestor Illumination in the blink of an eye as though he was taking a leisure stroll. "You should die too," the Martial Tao Prime Body said casually, as though he had already declared the death penalty for half-martial ancestor Illumination. Desolate Marshal. Seeing that he had nowhere to run, Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination's gaze intensified as he grit his teeth. You've gone too far. Do you really think I don't have any trump cards? Before his sentence was finished, he channeled his bloodline wildly. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of a tsunami echoed from the body of Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination. That was not all. The aura of the Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination was still rising rapidly. Heaven and Earth Illumination. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination shouted. Swoosh. A starry sky appeared behind Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination phenomenon and the 36 heavenly dipper stars shone brightly. Bloodline phenomenon. Both D-Fan and Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju revealed astonished expressions when they saw that. They had known Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination for many years, but they did not know that the latter was still hiding such a trump card. Even Half-Martial Ancestor Qinyu, who was proudest of his physique and bloodline, did not manage to condense a bloodline phenomenon. The astonishment in the eyes of D-Fan and Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju had just risen when they were replaced with endless fear and shock in the blink of an eye. The martial Dao Prime Body attacked. There were no dermic arts or secret skills, it was just a simple punch. Boom. There was a deafening bang. The 36 heavenly dipper stars in the firmaments were shattered. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination's expression changed continuously as he staggered in retreat. With every step back he spat out a mouthful of blood. Boom. Boom. The bloodline phenomenon was destroyed by a single punch from the martial Dao Prime Body. He was invincible. They stood no chance at all. The power displayed by the martial Dao Prime Body made D-Fan and Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju feel a sense of despair. In fact, the two of them could not even muster the desire to resist. The bloodline phenomenon of Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination shattered and his body received a tremendous impact. Cracks appeared in his organs. Desolate Martial U. Just as Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination was about to speak, the martial Dao Prime Body had already arrived before him. Without giving him the chance to continue speaking, he extended his fair palm and patted the head of Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination gently. Piak. The gaze of Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination dimmed instantly. His head looked intact. However, his consciousness was penetrated by the power of the martial Dao Prime Body and was smashed. His essence spirit was destroyed and he died. The corpse of Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination fell from midair. After 2 punches and a palm strike, 2 Half-Martial Ancestors were dead. D-Fan and Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju looked at everything helplessly and felt their limbs go cold. At that moment, the pride of Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju vanished completely. Half-Martial Ancestors were at the peak of the cultivation world and could kill all the mortals in Pingyang Town with a single thought. However, Half-Martial Ancestors were no different from mortals in the face of death. His past glory and reputation had all turned into dust at this moment. Right then, the martial Dao Prime Body turned around and looked at D-Fan and Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju, who were not far away. D-Fan. The martial Dao Prime Body said indifferently, "You tried to kill me twice but failed. You're dead if I attack once." D-Fan had not expected that this existence that was once insignificant as an ant in his eyes would possess such power today. In fact, it could even look down on him and decide his life and death. Back in the Dao Inheritance Ground, when he forcefully broke into the Dao Inheritance Ground and tried to kill Desolate Martial, the latter was helpless. Even the Creation Green Lotus was shattered by him. How many years had passed? To think that Desolate Martial would actually grow to such an extent. Desolate Martial. Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju's expression changed indeterminately. Suddenly he said, "I don't have any deep feud with you. I'm only here this time round for your heaven-slaying sword art. If you spare my life today, I'm willing to hand over the earth-slaying sword art with cupped fists." Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju knew very well that he could not move Desolate Martial unless he had enough bargaining chips. Therefore, he did not harbor any hope of luck and openly declared that he could hand over the earth-slaying sword art. "Indeed, there's no deep feud between us." The martial Dao Prime Body said, "However, since you intended to kill all the mortals in Pingyang Town, I can't keep you. As for the earth-slaying sword art, even if you don't hand it over, I can take it for myself." Before his sentence was finished, the martial Dao Prime Body attacked once more. Swoosh. Unknowingly, the martial Dao Prime Body had already arrived before Half-Martial Ancestor D-Ju and punched over. To others, The fist of the martial Dao prime body was the most ordinary fist technique without any variation or unnecessary movements. However, one could only truly sense how terrifying that punch was after facing it head-on. The will pressure released by that punch almost caused half-martial Ancestor Diju's Dao heart to collapse. There was no longer the martial Dao prime body in his vision, there was only that punch. Buzz. A sword hum sounded. Half-martial Ancestor Diju drew his sword and attacked. His arm and wrist did not make much movement when the sword stabbed out with a sharp edge. Clang. When the sharpness of the sword struck the fist of the martial Dao prime body, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Half-martial Ancestor Diju's expression changed starkly and his entire arm went numb. Kill? Suddenly, his eyes shone with a sword beam. The sword beam stabbed towards the eyes of the martial Dao prime body. Visual technique. The two of them were way too close. The burst of the visual technique arrived instantly. The martial Dao prime body could not dodge either. The martial Dao prime body had a mocking expression and merely made a motion to close his eyes. Clang. The visual technique sword beam struck the eyelids of the martial Dao prime body and did not pierce it, merely leaving a faint white scar. It could not even be considered as a wound. The next moment, the martial Dao prime body opened his eyes. Once his eyes were open, he was going to kill. Chapter 1494, Death of D. Fan. Chapter 1494, Death of D. Fan. Half-martial Ancestor Diju's visual technique was useless and he lost the initiative. The martial Dao prime body opened his eyes and strode forward. Half-martial Ancestor Diju raised his sword and stabbed. The martial Dao prime body's gaze was burning as he avoided the sword tip and flicked his finger gently, flicking the sword's spine. That was the most fragile part of the sword body. The sword trembled violently and was almost snapped into two by a single flick of the martial Dao prime body. Half-martial Ancestor Diju could not hold on to his destiny dermic weapon and it flew out of his hands. The martial Dao prime body scooped gently and gripped the sword in his palm, stabbing in reverse. Poof. Given the strength of the martial Dao prime body, his attack speed and every single punch and sword strike could release shocking lethality. Half-martial Ancestor Diju could not dodge at all and his chest was pierced by his destiny dermic weapon. It was not over yet. Half-martial Ancestor Diju's expression changed starkly. His destiny dermic weapon seemed like it was about to explode in his chest. There was no time to think. With a swoosh, half-martial Ancestor Diju's essence spirit escaped from the top of his head. Poof. Right then, his destiny dermic weapon exploded into sharp shards that sliced his body into pieces. Before he could react, a huge shadow enveloped him. The martial Dao prime body reached out and captured the essence spirit of half-martial Ancestor Diju in his palm. Kill? D-Fan realized that the martial Dao prime body would not let him off at all. He threw caution to the wind and channeled his essence spirit to its limits, releasing 5 dermic arts and a secret skill in succession. At the same time he swiped his storage bag and threw out more than 10 dermic weapons. The dermic arts, secret skills and dermic weapons blanketed the skies and suppressed the martial Dao prime body. Just a final struggle. The martial Dao prime body had an indifferent expression. You can't even defend against a single punch from me. Boom. The martial Dao prime body attacked. A punch that was as vast as an ocean drowned the dermic arts and secret skills in midair instantly, devouring them without a trace. More than 10 dermic weapons were sent flying by the punch of the martial Dao prime body as well. By the time they fell, they were dim and completely crippled. D-Fan, you're finished? The martial Dao prime body looked down at D-Fan. The difference in strength between them was too great. Back when the martial Dao prime body was at the Dharma characteristic realm and fought against Rakshasa, he had to release his bloodline phenomenon to suppress the latter. But now that the martial Dao prime body had entered the conjoint body realm, he did not even use his bloodline phenomenon. Boom. The martial Dao prime body punched out. D-Fan tore a protection talisman hurriedly. He had obtained that protection talisman when he explored the ancient ruins in the past. It could defend against the attacks of 10 half-martial ancestors, let alone a single one. However, the protection talisman could not defend against a single punch from the martial Dao prime body. Crack, crack, crack. The protection talisman shattered. However, the aftershock of that punch was still unusually terrifying. D-Fan's body exploded as well, turning into a mist of blood that was beyond recognition. Poof. The martial Tao prime body advanced and extended his finger, tapping Di Fan gently on the glabella. Di Fan could not defend at all and his head was pierced by the fingers of the martial Tao prime body instantly, dripping with blood. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying spirit consciousness fluctuation spread out. Di Fan knew that he was going to die and did not want to be humiliated. Therefore he channeled his essence spirit recklessly, wanting to self-destruct and commit suicide on the spot. Umph. The martial Tao prime body sneered, "You want to commit suicide in front of me? You can only die if I ask you to. If I don't, you're not even qualified to commit suicide." Di Fan fell into complete despair when he said that. A tragic feeling rose in his heart. As a half-martial ancestor expert, he could not even control his own life and death. "Desolate Marshal, what are you trying to do?" Di Fan asked hatefully. Half-martial ancestor Qinyu and half-martial ancestor Illumination had the shallowest feud with Desolate Marshal, but they were killed by him decisively. However, he and half-martial ancestor Diju were left behind by Desolate Marshal. Desolate Marshal was definitely not a benevolent person. Could it be? Di Fan thought of a possibility. "Desolate Marshal, how dare you!" Suddenly, Di Fan roared and struggled with all his might. However, pitch-black chains appeared from the ball of light in the martial Tao prime body's palm and coiled around the essence spirits of Di Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju. Soul-searching art. The martial Tao prime body had long attained greater mastery of the 30-odd inheritances in the Tao inheritance ground. The reason why he left Di Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju behind was because he wanted to obtain their secret skills. The earth-slaying sword art was something that the martial Tao prime body had to obtain. The soul-searching art began. The martial Tao prime body was immersed in the memories of Di Fan and half-master ancestor Diju and browsed through them rapidly as he filtered all useless information. A moment later, the essence spirits of Di Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju dimmed with lifeless expressions. The essence spirits of the two half-martial ancestors were equivalent to idiots now that their memories were completely stripped. He had benefited immensely from this soul search. The great chaos essence palm and earth-slaying sword art had already been obtained by the martial Tao prime body. Now that the martial Tao prime body had entered the conjoint body realm, his cultivation speed slowed down instantly. If he wanted to increase his speed and raise his cultivation as soon as possible, the simplest method was to use the martial Tao furnace to smelt cultivation techniques and secret skills continuously. He would turn those cultivation techniques and secret skills into his personal insights. Right now, the martial Tao prime body had obtained two top-tier cultivation techniques of the great chaos essence palm and earth-slaying sword art. As long as he could refine them, his strength would definitely increase once more. As for the storage bags of the four half-martial ancestors, there would definitely be some good stuff. That's not a bad idea. The martial Tao prime body narrowed his eyes in deep thought. Pingyang town returned to normal before long. Extreme West, Kunlun ruins. It had been 20 years since Su Zimo and the other two entered seclusion cultivation in the secret ground of the Kunlun ruins. The power contained by that large chunk of Ashoka wood was extremely immense. By the time Su Zimo refined and absorbed it for the 5th year, he had already broken through to the mid-stage conjoint body realm. However, that was only a small portion of the power that was refined from the Ashoka wood. Su Zimo did not stop and continued cultivating. In the 10th year, Nian Qi broke through and entered the mid-stage conjoint body realm. In the 16th year, Extreme Fire broke through and entered the late-stage conjoint body realm. After entering the conjoint body realm, cultivation became extremely difficult. It was normal for there to be no progress in his cultivation after hundreds or thousands of years. If they were in Tianhuang mainland, even if there were any immense opportunities, it would be difficult for Extreme Fire and Nian Qi to advance a minor realm in just 20 years. However, Extreme Fire and Nian Qi grew rapidly in the Kunlun ruins after consecutive battles and life and death experiences. 20 years passed by quickly and Su Zimo was still cultivating, refining the Ashoka wood. He had already absorbed most of the Ashoka wood. At the same time, his cultivation realm had already reached the peak of the mid-stage conjoint body realm and he was only a step away from breaking through. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi had already stopped cultivating. Unlike Su Zimo, the two of them did not have a treasure like the Ashoka wood for them to continuously absorb energy and cultivate. However, the two of them remained by Su Zimo's side, waiting for his cultivation to end. This day, Nian Qi, who was initially cultivating, suddenly opened her eyes and frowned slightly. MMM? Before long, Extreme Fire opened his eyes as well and frowned, saying softly, "Someone's here." Chapter 1495 Kunlun Race. Chapter 1495, Kunlun Race. The intruder was not coming from the entrance they entered, but from another direction. The three of them had yet to explore the secret ground and did not know where that direction led to. "Let's go and take a look." Extreme Fire used his spirit consciousness to send a voice transmission and stood up with Nian Qi stealthily, heading in the direction of the intruder without alarming Su Zimo, who was still cultivating. As they advanced along the passage, they could even see some corpses on the ground. Those were the people who died in the past. Suddenly, both of them stopped in their tracks and exchanged glances. In a flash, they arrived at a dark corner and retracted their auras to hide. Chaotic footsteps sounded from afar. It sounded like there were at least a dozen people. The auras released by those people were extremely powerful. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi exchanged glances with grim expressions. The two of them could even sense the aura of a half-martial ancestor among the dozens of auras. However, they had encountered countless battles and killed many half-martial ancestor experts at the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins as well. Since both their cultivations had advanced, there was naturally no fear in their hearts as they continued listening. "God's messenger, it's all thanks to you that we were able to dispel the formation outside." "That's right. This formation has been in the Kunlun ruins since the ancient era. However, no one has been able to dispel it all these years." Two flattering voices sounded. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi nodded to themselves. From the looks of it, those people should be from the Kunlun ruins. It was extremely likely to be the Kunlun race. Thereafter, another person said, "It's nothing much. Back in my place, the Tao of formations has been passed down for a long time. I'm quite accomplished at it." Extreme Fire and Nian Qi frowned at the same time. The person who spoke later was clearly the God's messenger. However, there was something strange about the way this God's messenger spoke. His tone was weird and his pronunciation was not precise. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi could only tell what he meant after listening carefully. "Who set up this formation?" The God's messenger spoke once more. "This person is very powerful. If not for the fact that it has been a long time and some of the formation eyes were destroyed, it would have been difficult for me to dispel this. I heard that she's a woman from Tianhuang Mainland back in the ancient era." Someone at the side said, "It's because of this Kunlun barrier that she's the only one who could enter the Kunlun ruins and leave alive after all these years." When she heard that, Nian Qi's heart skipped a beat. The person continued, "Nobody knows who that woman is. She's a mystery." Although those people did not know, Nian Qi knew. That was because the storyteller had once said that Fairy Ling Long had entered the Kunlun ruins. There were few records about the Kunlun ruins in Enigma Palace. Those precious records were left behind by Fairy Ling Long. The woman that those people referred to came from the ancient era and happened to match Fairy Ling Long. In other words, the owner of this secret ground was Fairy Ling Long of the past. Only Fairy Ling Long could set up such a complicated terrain at the entrance and set up a supreme formation at the other end that the Kunlun race could not dispel. Even the God's messenger who dispelled the formation admitted that he would not have been able to dispel the formation if it was not for the fact that it was too long and some of the formation eyes were destroyed. Extreme Fire was not present when the storyteller recounted Fairy Ling Long's past. Nian Qi sent a voice transmission secretly with her spirit consciousness to inform Extreme Fire about this matter. However, both of them were puzzled at the same time. Why did Fairy Ling Long set up such a secret ground? What happened in this secret ground back then? Someone said, "The mystery is about to be resolved. We've already entered this place and will definitely be able to discover traces of that woman." Back then, experts of our Kunlun race hunted down that woman. To think that all of them would die here. The Kunlun clansmen walked in with corpses on their way. "Look over there." Suddenly, someone exclaimed. "So many dermic weapons. There are also many elixirs, cultivation techniques and secret manuals. Those are all treasures. Heavens! So the legend is true." The Kunlun clansman exclaimed. "What's going on?" The voice of the God's messenger sounded. Immediately, a Kunlun clansman replied, "Legend has it that after that woman entered the Kunlun ruins, she snatched away a large number of treasures from the Kunlun ruins. There were countless dermic weapons, elixirs, cultivation techniques and treasures. To think that all of those treasures would be preserved in this secret ground. At that point, Extreme Fire and Yan Qi's hearts skipped a beat. First, it was inevitable that they would be shocked upon hearing that news. Second, the two of them were even more puzzled. They could not understand why Fairy Ling Long would leave so many treasures in this secret ground instead of taking them away. There's people here. Suddenly the god's messenger said. Immediately after, Extreme Fire and Yan Qi felt a bedazzling light beam shining towards the corner they were hiding in. Boom. Boom. The wall that shielded the two of them collapsed instantly. Their figures were completely exposed. Instantly, gazes landed on the two of them with terrifying killing intent. The atmosphere within the secret ground instantly turned tense. Extreme Fire swept his gaze. There were a total of 16 Kunlun clansmen opposite him. Although they were all in human form, it was clear that they came from different races and the auras they emanated were different as well. The attire of the Kunlun race was similar and only a single person in the crowd wore a wide white robe. Unlike others, he looked striking. If Extreme Fire was not wrong, this white-robed man should be the god's messenger that the other Kunlun clansmen spoke of. Yan Qi's gaze landed on the white-robed man as well. For some reason, she felt a sense of familiarity from the white-robed man. The white-robed man also looked at Yan Qi with a deep intent in his eyes. Neither Extreme Fire or Yan Qi could sense the cultivation realm of the white-robed man. It was hazy as though it was covered by something. They were in a gigantic secret chamber with various treasures stacked on the sides. There were even some elegant words on the wall that were covered in dust. It was unknown what they were. Given the current situation, neither Extreme Fire nor Yan Qi dared to divert their attention to read and merely scan the place. Intruders. The only half-martial ancestor of the Kunlun race opposite stood out and looked at Extreme Fire and Night Spirit with a ferocious gaze as he shouted. Outsiders have arrived. The white-robed man murmured in deep thought. In other words, there's a high chance that the other end of this secret ground leads to Tianhuang Mainland. That's right. The eyes of many Kunlun clansmen lit up as well. The Kunlun half-martial ancestor could not help but exclaim, "That woman is way too powerful. She could actually create a passage under the envelopment of the Kunlun barrier." There was a Kunlun barrier in the Kunlun ruins. The people inside could not get out and neither could those outside get in. However, the existence of this secret ground shattered that fact. Chapter 1496, Fierce Battle. Chapter 1496, Fierce Battle. Haha. The Kunlun half-martial ancestor roared in laughter. Since we know of this passage, we can leave the Kunlun ruins. That's right. Another Kunlun clansman nodded. We can finally leave this place and return to Tianhuang Mainland. We'll have a chance to advance to the Mahayana realm and become true patriarchs, breaking free of the restraints of heaven and earth. Due to the terrifying primordial war in the Kunlun ruins, there were forbidden regions of divine powers left behind. Mahayana patriarchs would cause a divine power storm upon entering. It was even more impossible for anyone to advance to the Mahayana realm in the Kunlun ruins. That was because as long as one comprehended divine powers, a divine power storm would be formed. This meant that even if one managed to advance to the Mahayana realm successfully, they would die immediately and be shredded by the divine power storm. Everyone, we are indeed from Tianhuang Mainland. However, we bear no ill intentions towards you guys in the Kunlun ruins. Extreme Fire had a calm expression and cupped his fists politely without engaging the Kunlun clansmen recklessly. The Kunlun half-martial ancestor sneered, "Outsiders should be killed without mercy. Kill them." The Kunlun half-martial ancestor waved his hand casually and did not take Extreme Fire and Yan Qi seriously at all. Extreme Fire's expression turned cold as well. In Tianhuang Mainland he was also a mighty figure who could dominate over an entire area. After his rebirth and a few battles, he was even more famous. He was polite because he did not want to have a conflict with the Kunlun race the moment he arrived at the Kunlun ruins. However, since the Kunlun race wanted to kill him, he would not fear them either. Extreme Fire sneered as well, "You'll have to see if you have the capabilities to kill me." Before his sentence was finished, two Kunlun mighty figures had already arrived. One of them extended a hairy, rough hand and slapped Extreme Fire's head. "Beast, how dare you act so brazenly before me?" Extreme Fire hollered and his glabella shone. A scarlet tripod flew out and smashed towards the Kunlun mighty figure. The Kunlun mighty figure realized how powerful it was as well and reacted extremely quickly. He changed tactics at the last moment and punched towards the incoming tripod with his powerful body. Boom. There was a loud bang. The fist of the Kunlun mighty figure collided with Extreme Fire's destiny dermic weapon. Howl? The Kunlun mighty figure shrieked with a pained expression. His fist collided with Extreme Fire's destiny dermic weapon and his tendons and bones felt like they were about to split. The pain was unbearable and his palms swelled instantly. It was not over yet. Raging flames burst forth from the scarlet tripod and surged towards the Kunlun mighty figure's fist. The fur on the arm of the Kunlun mighty figure was burned to ashes instantly. The intensity of the flames even burned that person's flesh. Demonic chi rumbled as fresh blood splashed onto the flames. However, the scarlet flame did not show any signs of extinguishing and intensified. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped the Kunlun mighty figure. Roar! The Kunlun mighty figure roared and channeled his bloodline to its limits, wanting to transform into his true form. He was not human. His combat strength could only be unleashed to its limits in his true form. However, Extreme Fire did not give him that chance at all. Extreme Fire grabbed with his palm and instantly, an incomparably rich dermic power gathered in his palm, forming a spear that burned with flames. The spear was completely red and burned through by the flames. Swoosh! Extreme Fire tossed in reverse. The spear turned into a red streak of light and pierced the person's chest, bursting forth with terrifying flames instantly. The flames burned from the inside out. In a few breaths, the Kunlun mighty figure's organs were burned to ashes. The person struggled and shrieked in the raging flames in a hysterical manner. However, he could not endure through it eventually. The pain on his body was unbearable and his essence spirit broke out. However, it was devoured rapidly by the flames and turned into ashes, dying on the spot. Although they were both at the conjoint body realm, this Kunlun mighty figure could not last 3 rounds against Extreme Fire. Another conjoint body mighty figure that lunged towards Nian Qi was secretly alarmed when he saw that. He did not dare to be careless and had already reverted to his true form in midair. Roar! It was a demon beast that resembled a dhole. However, the bloodline aura of this demon beast was much more terrifying than dholes. Its gaze was vicious and extremely violent. The demon beast was covered in scales from head to toe and had sharp claws and fangs. It was agile and possessed shocking speed. This was the almost extinct ferocious beast, the Yazi in Tianhuang Mainland. The Yazi was not only violent and bloodthirsty, it was also extremely vengeful. It would definitely bear a grudge against anyone that offended it. The Kunlun ruins was probably the only place with such a powerful ferocious beast. The Yazi transformed into its true form and its blood chi surged into the skies. Arriving before Nian Qi, it opened its mouth and bit towards her. Nian Qi looked extremely weak and her body was not even as thick as one of the Yazi's arms. That single bite could rip Nian Qi apart instantly. Not far away, the white-robed man looked at everything with interest and a fake smile. Nian Qi's expression was calm and there was no hint of fear in her eyes. The moment the Yazi lunged forward, she attacked. Boom! Boom! The sound of a tsunami echoed from Nian Qi's body. Golden blood chi surged and surged into the skies, suppressing the bloodline of the Yazi instantly. Nian Qi extended her fair and slender palm and pushed down on the top of the Yazi's head. Boom! The ground trembled and a huge pit was smashed out by the Yazi's head. The Yazi's mouth was filled with blood and its sharp teeth were mostly shattered. The Kunlun half-martial ancestor frowned slightly and murmured, "The bloodline of the god race." Instinctively, he glanced at the white-robed man. The white-robed man smiled gently. "It's just a remnant of the god race with an impure bloodline." After a brief pause he continued, "However, that woman is extremely talented. It's indeed rare for her to be able to cultivate to such an extent given that she only has half the bloodline of the god race." After the white-robed man said that, the battle on the other side came to an end. The Yazi wanted to struggle and stand up. However, it could not break free from the suppression of Nian Qi's palm. It was as though the thing that was suppressing him was not a palm, but an unshakable 100,000 mountains. Poof! Exerting strength in her palm, a divine light burst forth and penetrated the Yazi's head instantly. The massive body of the pure-blooded ferocious beast froze for a moment before slamming heavily onto the ground, creating dust clouds as it died on the spot. Given extreme fire and Yan Qi's current combat strength, there were very few people who could defeat them in a one-on-one fight at the conjoined body realm. Their combat strength could even suppress some half-martial ancestor experts. Swash, swash, swash. Apart from the white-robed man who was motionless, the remaining 13 Kunlun clansmen, including the Kunlun half-martial ancestor, stood out and surrounded extreme fire and Yan Qi. Chapter 1497 9 Neonate. Chapter 1497 9 Neonate. Roar. Howl. The 13 Kunlun clansmen reverted to their true forms and were all various primordial ferocious beasts. Some of them looked familiar, but some of them had long gone extinct in Tianhuang Mainland. None of them were human. According to Fairy Ling Long, the Kunlun race was fused from the races that survived the Primordial War. During the Primordial War, the human race was the weakest among the 10,000 races and was enslaved. They did not even have the rights to participate in the Primordial War. Therefore, there were almost no humans in the Kunlun race. The Kunlun half-martial ancestor was a 9 Neonate. The 9 Neonate was a pure-blooded ferocious beast and was extremely violent. With 9 heads that resembled strange snakes, each time it opened its mouth and howled, the sounds of infants crying would echo in a bewitching manner. Back in the elementary ancient battlefield, Su Zimo encountered a 9 Neonate. However, this 9 Neonate had already cultivated to the half-martial ancestor realm and was much stronger than the one in the elementary ancient battlefield. Hoo hoo hoo. The 9 Neonate roared into the skies and let out an infantile cry. Extreme fire and Yan Qi frowned and felt uncomfortable. Their blood qi surged and they could not suppress it. The dermic power of the 9 Neonate was extremely high, and a single sound domain secret skill had already affected extreme fire and Yan Qi. Boom, boom, boom. At the same time, the other 12 conjoint body ferocious beasts charged forward towards extreme fire and Yan Qi. The ferocious beasts rammed wildly and the ground quaked violently with a terrifying might as though it could rip extreme fire and Yan Qi into pieces. Swoosh. Extreme fire had a grim expression as he conjured hand seals repeatedly with both hands. Instantly, 3 scarlet flames burned beside him. 3 balls of flames revolved around him slowly. Scarlet flame revolving lantern. If it was only against 1 or 2 conjoint body mighty figures, the dermic art of the scarlet flame revolving lantern was enough to protect him. But now, 12 conjoint body ferocious beasts had lunged forward with a half-martial ancestor 9 Neonate watching keenly, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Extreme fire did not dare to hold back either. Condense. He hollered, and the dermic art in his hands changed once more. 3 scarlet flames gathered rapidly. A blaze surged. The Samadhi Dao fire descended. Extreme fire pointed forward and the Samadhi Dao fire swept towards 9 conjoint body ferocious beasts at the front. Sensing danger, some of the ferocious beasts stopped in their tracks hurriedly. Some of them shifted horizontally rapidly with their agile movement techniques and avoided the range of the Samadhi Dao fire. Only 3 ferocious beasts with massive bodies and relatively sluggish movements were unable to dodge and were enveloped by the Samadhi Dao fire. Ah! Instantly, the 3 ferocious beasts let out tragic cries. The flesh on their bodies melted rapidly and blood gushed out before it was burned into nothingness by the Samadhi Dao fire. Boom! Boom! Right then, from the 9 Neonate at the side, 4 of its heads swayed and opened their mouths. Suddenly, a series of turbid torrents surged down and splashed onto the 3 ferocious beasts. Like galaxies of the 9 heavens, the 4 torrents rained down in a terrifying manner. Shing! The 4 torrents collided repeatedly against the power of the Samadhi Dao fire. This was a fight between fire and water. Fire and water countered each other. However, whether water could extinguish fire or fire could incinerate water depended on the strength of the 2 powers. The 2 powers were in a stalemate. If extreme fire and the 9 Neonate were to fight head-on, it would be nothing much. However, the battlefield of the fight between the Samadhi Dao fire and 4 torrents was on the bodies of the 3 ferocious beasts. The 3 conjoint body ferocious beasts were in immense pain after enduring the Samadhi Dao fire. Now that they were gushed by the torrents, they died before long without corpses remaining in the fight between fire and water. Intruders! The 9 Neonate shrieked, "You've angered me!" The 9 heads of the 9 Neonate shone with endless rage. Suddenly, The 9 heads moved at the same time and opened their mouths, spitting out flames. Torrents interweaved into a destructive fire and water net that enveloped extreme fire. The flames even carried a nauseating stench. "Be careful, the flames are poisonous," Nian Qi reminded hurriedly. Extreme Fire realized it quickly as well with a grim expression and channeled his destiny dermic weapon to defend. At the same time, Extreme Fire conjured hand seals repeatedly and condensed dermic arts to charge at the fire and water net, wanting to tear a hole through it. However, the fire and water net was the 9 Neonates' innate divine power. If their cultivation realms were similar, Extreme Fire would definitely be able to tear this net apart. But now that the 9 Neonate was a half-martial ancestor expert, its dermic powers were boundless and endless. There was no way to tear the fire and water net apart. Just as the fire and water net was about to descend, Nian Qi arrived beside Extreme Fire in a flash the moment she killed a conjoint body ferocious beast. Boom. She channeled her bloodline and released her bloodline phenomenon right away. Behind her, a gigantic pyramid appeared. It was ancient and mysterious with countless mortals kneeling beneath it, praying piously. Standing at the top of the pyramid, Nian Qi was like a god of that world. When he saw that, the white-robed man's gaze intensified and he nodded to himself. "Senior, defend against the other Kunlun clansmen while I deal with this 9 Neonate," Nian Qi said swiftly. Shing. The pyramid surged into the skies and tore the fire and water net apart instantly, suppressing the 9 Neonate. "Ah!" The 9 Neonate shrieked, "How dare you!" The pyramid descended and ruptured 2 of the 9 Neonates' heads. Flesh flew and brain juices flowed onto the ground in a frightening manner. However, in the blink of an eye, the 2 heads of the 9 Neonate regrew. Although conjoined body mighty figures could regrow severed limbs, they would definitely not be able to regrow their heads. However, it was different for this 9 Neonate. The 9 Neonate had 9 heads and it would not die even if 8 of them fell off. Its essence spirit could be shifted freely within the 9 heads. It would not die as long as one of them was not destroyed. Nian Qi controlled the gigantic pyramid and strode forward, causing it to descend once more. At the same time, she used both her hands and legs to conjure dermic arts and secret skills. In the blink of an eye, she released a torrential storm of attacks on the 9 Neonate. Poof, poof, poof. The 9 Neonates' heads exploded one after another. However, they regrew before long. During a most dangerous moment in their fight, the 9 Neonate lost 8 of its heads and was nearly killed by Nian Qi on the spot. Even the 9 Neonate who was a half-martial ancestor was completely suppressed by Nian Qi. On the other side, there were only 7 conjoint body ferocious beasts left. The combined attacks of those ferocious beasts could not defend against Extreme Fire's killing intent. "God's messenger, please attack." The 9 Neonate could not hold on any longer and cried for help. "Fu-fu." The white-robed man at the side smiled gently and extended his palm slowly. His blood qi surged with a blinding golden light as he said indifferently, "It's time to end things." Chapter 1498, God Race Half-Martial Ancestor. Chapter 1498, God Race Half-Martial Ancestor. When she saw the golden blood qi surging on the white-robed man's arm, Nian Qi's expression changed as she exclaimed, "God Race." She was extremely familiar with that bloodline. There was no doubt that the white-robed man was from the God race. However, how could there be a God race being in the Kunlun ruins? The Kunlun ruins had the existence of the Kunlun barrier. If it sensed a God race being entering, it would turn extremely berserk. Nian Qi was nearly killed by the power of the Kunlun barrier. In other words, the white-robed man could not have entered from outside. Could he be a descendant of the God race that survived the primordial war? However, if that was the case, why would the Kunlun race be so respectful to this person and address him as God's messenger? Furthermore, for some reason, Nian Qi felt that this person was different from some of the God race beings she had seen before. As the white-robed man's blood qi surged, his black hair transformed into his long golden hair rapidly. A half-martial ancestor. The white-robed man was a half-martial ancestor expert. The white-robed man did not have any storage bags on him either. However, a gigantic sword suddenly appeared in his hands. It was a 2-handed gigantic sword. Such a weapon was extremely rare in the cultivation world. Typically, the sword of sword cultivators specialized in movement. Only the God race would use such a 2-handed gigantic sword. "Little girl, you're still too inexperienced." The white-robed man smiled gently and strode forward. Gripping the gigantic sword with both hands, he raised it high and his blood chi surged as a blinding golden light burst forth from the sword. Under the illumination of the golden light, this god race being was like a true god, unexcelled in the world. Extreme Fire's heart skipped a beat. In front of this person he even had an uncontrollable thought of giving up all resistance. With a grim expression, Nian Qi controlled the pyramid behind her and charged towards the white-robed man. Slash! The white-robed man shouted. Gripping the sword with both hands, the gigantic sword shone brightly and slashed towards the incoming pyramid. Boom! There was a deafening bang. The entire secret chamber shook violently and dust billowed as everyone's vision turned blurry. Crack! 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 Cracks appeared on the mysterious and majestic pyramid, growing larger as they covered its entire body rapidly. With a loud bang, the pyramid dissipated into emptiness on the spot. Nian Qi's bloodline phenomenon was sliced apart by the white-robed man. Her body swayed and blood oozed from the corner of her lips. However, her eyes were still filled with fighting spirit. Swoosh! In a flash, Nian Qi left a series of afterimages on the spot and lunged towards the white-robed man at an extremely fast speed. You want to engage in melee combat? The white-robed man smirked and did not mind at all. Swinging his sword with both hands he attacked widely. However, there were almost no openings and his attacks were ferocious. Nian Qi's movement technique was graceful and unusually agile as she lingered around the white-robed man continuously, looking for an opportunity. Ethereal Peak had too many cultivation techniques and secret skills. Nian Qi had also cultivated many movement techniques and escape techniques, infusing them into her comprehension. She made use of the bloodline and physique of the god race to cultivate a movement technique suitable for herself. The white-robed man swung his gigantic sword with both hands and possessed immense strength. However, he could not even touch the corner of Nian Qi's clothes. Nian Qi was still tense. That was because she knew that there was a high chance she would be killed by the white-robed man if she made a mistake. She could not withstand the white-robed man's power at all. However, the white-robed man was calm and there was no hint of anxiousness in his eyes. Suddenly, perhaps due to fatigue from the long sword wielding, a fleeting opening appeared in the white-robed man's chest. Without hesitation, Nian Qi strode forward with a bright gaze and threw a punch forward. Bang! Although the punch struck the white-robed man's chest, Nian Qi's expression changed starkly. Her fist did not seem to be striking flesh but steel. Shing! The white robes on the man exploded, revealing a muscular, mighty figure with golden shimmering armor. The armor looked incomparably thick with obscure and complicated patterns that shone with a golden light. Nian Qi's punch struck the thick golden armor. The god race man had revealed that opening intentionally. You were tricked. The god race man smiled gently and punched out as well, punching Nian Qi in the chest. Poof! Instantly Nian Qi was sent flying and spat out a mouthful of blood in midair. Her face was pale and she had a dispirited expression as her blood chi was dispersed. With a bang, Nian Qi smashed onto the ground heavily and felt like her bones and tendons were about to split. Instantly, a layer of cold sweat appeared on her face. You should know that I've already shown mercy. The god race man walked slowly towards Nian Qi with a faint smile. If I had attacked with my sword instead of punching earlier on, you would have been a corpse. On account that you're talented and have half of the god race's bloodline in your body, I can take you in as my slave. Are you willing? Nian Qi's gaze was cold and she said nothing. She knew in her heart that the god race man had indeed shown mercy earlier on. However, she would never agree to submit. When the god race man saw that Nian Qi was unwilling to speak, he frowned slightly. You have to understand that I'm giving you a chance to survive. Thereafter, he looked at Extreme Fire on the other side and said indifferently, for example, the only thing awaiting him is death. Swoosh! Right then, Extreme Fire charged out of the encirclement of a few Kunlun mighty figures and threw the scarlet tripod in his hands towards the god race man. Whoosh! The wind howled. The god race man had a mocking expression and slashed down without even looking. Clang! Sparks flew. The scarlet tripod was slashed back by the sword of the god race man and charged towards Extreme Fire at an even faster speed. At the same time, the Kunlun mighty figures seized the opportunity to attack. Extreme Fire had no cloning techniques and a few wounds appeared on his body instantly. In the end, he was even struck by his destiny-dermic weapon before slamming heavily against the wall of the secret chamber behind him and sliding down slowly. Cracks appeared on the walls. It was clear how terrifying the power of that blow was. "And how dare you attack me?" The God Race man sneered and was prepared to step forward to kill Extreme Fire completely. Ah! Right then, at the other end of the secret chamber, a loud roar sounded from the entrance of the tunnel, as though it contained torrential rage. "MMM?" The God Race man frowned slightly. "There's someone else." In the blink of an eye, a figure appeared on the other end of the tunnel. The cultivator had green robes, black hair and refined features. His gaze was like lightning as he surveyed his surroundings. In fact, the Kunlun mighty figures did not even dare to meet his gaze and avoided it instinctively. "Master, are you all right?" When the green-robed cultivator saw Extreme Fire, who was slumped against the wall, he hurried forward and helped feed the latter a few elixirs. The God Race man sneered and could not help but stifle a chuckle. He thought that it was some powerful character. To think that it was that person's disciple. If he had already suppressed the master with such ease, there was nothing to fear about a single disciple. Chapter 1499, Suppressing a Half-Martial Ancestor. Chapter 1499, Suppressing a Half-Martial Ancestor. "Zimo, you're back." Extreme Fire smiled. "I'm fine, I'll be alright after a short rest. Be careful, this person is a half-martial ancestor of the God Race and isn't weak." "Yes." Zimo nodded. "Additionally," Extreme Fire continued, "this should be a secret passage opened up by Fairy Ling Long. It can pass through the Kunlun barrier and connect to Tianhuang Mainland and Kunlun ruins. These people have just found out about the existence of this secret passage as well. Since they've already made a move, we can't let them leave alive." Although Extreme Fire and the others did not know the reason why Fairy Ling Long opened up this secret ground, they believed that there must be a reason for her actions. Furthermore, these people would definitely bring about even greater trouble if they escaped from this place. The only way to solve this problem once and for all was to kill all these Kunlun clansmen here. Fufu. At the side, the 9 Neonate had already snapped out of its stupor and its injuries were mostly recovered. When it heard that, it could not help but sneer. "A mere late-stage conjoint body wishes to kill us all." After absorbing and refining that large chunk of Ashoka wood, Zimo's cultivation had already reached the late-stage conjoint body realm. He advanced 2 minor realms in succession. If he was cultivating normally, it would be impossible without at least a few thousand years. The power contained by the Ashoka wood was way too pure and massive, and it matched Zimo's Green Lotus True Body completely. The Green Lotus True Body could absorb the power of the Ashoka wood perfectly. God Race. Zimo looked at the God Race man not far away and frowned slightly. How could the God Race exist in the Kunlun ruins? At that moment, Nian Qi struggled to stand up as well and returned to Zimo's side, bowing slightly. "Young master. You're the disciple of that ant." The God Race man looked at Zimo and smiled confidently. "I only used a single slash to suppress your master. A single finger should suffice to suppress you." "Is that so?" Expressionlessly, Zimo walked towards the God Race man and said indifferently, "You can try." As a God Race being and a half-martial ancestor, the God Race man did not take Zimo seriously at all. Indeed, as he said, he extended a finger and pushed down onto Zimo. Although it was only a finger, the finger surged with a golden blood chi that resembled a heavenly piercing pillar. It crushed down towards Zimo with a shocking aura. Zimo had a calm expression. There was no hint of panic in his eyes against the suppression of the finger. In fact, he did not even dodge. The finger was about to touch his head. Suddenly, Zimo attacked. In a flash, he gripped the finger of the God Race man. MMM? The power of the God Race man was blocked and could not continue its suppression. His heart skipped a beat and he wanted to withdraw his finger. However, his finger was gripped tightly by Zimo and did not budge at all. It was impossible for him to pull out. Crack. Right then a jarring sound echoed. The God Race man's eyes widened and his expression changed, revealing a pained expression. Ah. Finally, the God Race man could not help but let out a shrill scream. Zimo had snapped the God Race man's finger. The God Race man retreated wildly, but Zimo gripped his finger and would not let go. Shing. Flashes of blood appeared. The two opposing powers tore the finger apart. "Ant, how dare you injure my divine body?" The god race man roared with a furious expression. It was merely a severed finger and it regrew in the blink of an eye. However, all 10 fingers were connected to the heart and the pain of losing a finger was unbearable. Furthermore, the god race man had not expected anyone to be able to injure him. What sort of a broken divine body is this weak? Sneering coldly, Su Zimo did not stop and closed in, emitting an extremely terrifying pressure. Light slash. The god race man gripped his sword with both hands and his blood chi surged, releasing the sound of tsunamis as he slashed towards Su Zimo. The power released by that slash was way too strong. The sword shone brightly in a bedazzling manner. This was the sword strike that destroyed Nian Qi's bloodline phenomenon and severely injured Extreme Fire. Against that torrential and ferocious slash, Su Zimo did not dodge or avoid. Instead he reached out and grabbed the gigantic golden sword. You have a death wish. The god race man's expression was cold. The green-robed man was courting death by trying to defend against his half-martial ancestor dermic weapon with his body. He was confident that he could slice the green-robed man into 2 with that slash. Bang. Before he could finish his thought, his gigantic golden sword had already struck Su Zimo's palm. Nothing as expected happened. Su Zimo was not cleaved into 2 and even his palm was intact. The absorption and refinement of the Ashoka wood did not only bring about an increase in cultivation realm, the green lotus true body was also growing rapidly and became stronger. The Kunlun mighty figures and the 9 Neonate widened their eyes in disbelief and their jaws almost dropped to the ground. Impossible. The god race man exclaimed in shock. His sword was blocked by the green-robed man's body of flesh. Even with his divine body, he did not dare to defend against the edge of a half-martial ancestor's dermic weapon. How did this person grow his physical body? Su Zimo sneered, you want to kill me with your puny methods. Seizing the opportunity while the god race man was slightly distracted, Su Zimo strode forward and flipped his palm, suppressing the god race man's head. The palm transformed into a gigantic seal in midair with a majestic aura that was unstoppable. The god race man was horrified and abandoned the gigantic sword in his hands right away. His body retreated rapidly while he reared his head furiously to avoid the gigantic seal. Boom. The god race man's face avoided the gigantic seal in midair. However, the gigantic seal still smashed heavily against his chest. It smashed right into the ground, creating a gigantic pit. Crack, crack, crack. Cracks appeared on the golden armor of the god race man and it shattered into pieces. The god race man's face was pale. If not for the protection of the body armor, Su Zimo's palm strike earlier on would have shattered his body into pieces. Ta, ta, ta. To the god race man, Su Zimo's footsteps sounded like the sound of death. He had never expected to encounter such a terrifying and powerful cultivator here. Right now, he only wanted to escape and inform his clansmen about what happened today. Nobody knew what variables such a powerful existence would create in the Kunlun ruins. Swoosh. The god race man channeled his blood chi once more and leaped up from the pit. Before he could escape, his vision blurred and a figure had already arrived before him. Su Zimo did not waste time talking or give him any chance to catch his breath. With a backhand slap, he crushed down once more. Chapter 1500, Kill Them All. Chapter 1500, Kill Them All. You. The armor of the god race man was shattered and he was already in a wretched state after escaping from the pit. He no longer had his confidence and grace from earlier on. There was only panic and fear in his eyes. Swoosh. Although the god race man did not seem like he made any moves, a gigantic golden shield suddenly appeared in his hands and stood erected before him. Su Zimo focused his gaze. The god race man did not have a storage bag. He could clearly see that the gigantic golden shield was retrieved from a ring on the god race man's finger. The purpose of the ring must be similar to the storage bag on his waist. Su Zimo did not think too much about it and continued to slap down. Boom. A loud bang sounded when Su Zimo's palm landed on the golden shield. Although the golden shield was intact, Su Zimo's palm strike suppressed both the shield and the god race man. The god race man's body slammed heavily onto the ground. This time round, without the protection of the golden armor, the god race man's organs were severely shaken and he spat out a huge mouthful of blood. All right. Su Zimo nodded slightly. You're quite capable to take 2 of my palm strikes. Those words sounded extremely piercing to the god race man. As a half-martial ancestor of the god race, he had never endured such humiliation. The god race man stood up slowly and wanted to pick up the gigantic golden shield beside him. However, he realized that the gigantic shield was already dim. The mysterious runes on it were completely destroyed by Su Zimo. That was because there was a clear palm print in the middle of the gigantic shield that covered all the runes beneath. Who are you? The god race man's expression was grim as he grit his teeth. Are you some taboo race from Tianhuang Mainland? I'm not a taboo. I'm a human, Su Zimo said indifferently. Impossible. The god race man shouted, humans are the weakest race and are at the bottom of the food chain. How can you be a human? I'm Desolate Marshal. Su Zimo continued. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The god race man did not have much of a reaction when he heard the words Desolate Marshal and merely shook his head repeatedly. Narrowing his gaze, Su Zimo advanced once more and reached out to grab the god race man's head. It was way too strange for traces of the god race to appear in the Kunlun ruins. Furthermore, if the god race being had not heard of his name, he was definitely not from Tianhuang Mainland. Su Zimo wanted to restrain the essence spirit of the god race being and search his soul. Sensing danger, the god race man suddenly shouted, "What are you guys waiting for? You can only leave alive if you attack together." It was only now that the 9 Neonate and the other Kunlun clansmen reacted. After all, Su Zimo had only attacked twice earlier on and the god race man was already beaten up so badly without any chance to retaliate. Desolate Marshal. The god race man roared and his blood chi surged as he shouted, "It's impossible if you want to suppress me." Swoosh. A gigantic and majestic ancient structure appeared behind the god race man. It was golden in color and emanated a mysterious aura. That was the bloodline phenomenon of the god race. Beneath the pyramid, countless living beings were kneeling and praying with pious expressions. The god race man stood at the top of the pyramid and spread his arms, as though endless energy was gushing into his body. His injuries were healing rapidly and his aura was rising continuously. At the same time, the 9 Neonate and the remaining 6 Kunlun mighty figures closed in and attacked one after another. The 9 Neonate and the others realized how strong Su Zimo was and did not dare to hold back. Dermic arts, secret skills and dermic weapons filled the skies densely. Puny light of a firefly. Su Zimo's voice sounded with a supreme will. How dare you try to compete against the bright moon? After saying that, Su Zimo's figure vanished completely. In his place was a jade green lotus that soared into the skies. It was pristine as jade and its petals blossomed slowly with a resplendent glow. This is... The 9 Neonate and the other Kunlun mighty figures revealed shocked expressions. The green lotus swayed gently. Visible ripples appeared across the entire void, as though a rock had fallen into a calm lake. Many dermic arts in midair dissipated. Some of the incoming Khanate mighty figure dermic weapons dimmed rapidly and fell from midair before they could even approach the green lotus. Snap. As for perfect mighty figure or even lesser dermic weapons, they shattered and were destroyed on the spot. The green lotus swayed once more. Another ripple spread. The 6 Kunlun mighty figures could not dodge at all. They seemed to be frozen in midair and enveloped by the ripple. Poof, poof, poof. Everywhere the ripple passed, the bodies of the Kunlun mighty figures exploded into blood mists. The essence spirits of the 6 Kunlun mighty figures were devoured silently by the ripple produced by the creation green lotus and turned into nothingness. All 6 Kunlun mighty figures died without corpses remaining. The 9 Neonate realized that something was amiss and retreated first. Even so, 8 of its 9 heads were shattered and it nearly died here. The 9 Neonate retreated rapidly and fled into the distance. Right then the creation green lotus swayed for the 3rd time. Boom, boom, boom. The pyramid beneath the god race man collapsed instantly and countless gravel rolled down, burying the living beings that were kneeling and praying beneath. The god race man's eyes widened and cracks appeared on his body. This was a fight between bloodline phenomenons. His bloodline phenomenon was completely defeated. Su Zimo's figure reappeared and arrived beside the god race man in the blink of an eye. He slapped the latter on the head and captured the latter's essence spirit. Thereafter, in a flash, Su Zimo chased after the escaping 9 Neonate. Young master, be careful. The 9 Neonate has 9 heads and the ferocious beast can only die if 9 heads are minced at the same time. Nian Qi reminded hurriedly. Oh. Su Zimo had a calm expression and replied casually without being surprised, that's nothing much. Grabbing the essence spirit of the god race man with one hand, Su Zimo closed his sword fingers with the other and slashed gently in the direction of the 9 Neonate. After slashing out, Su Zimo had already turned around and walked back without even looking at the 9 Neonate. Tiske. Tiske. TSK. Sensing danger, the escaping 9 Neonate could not help but turn around. That single glance was filled with an incomparably resplendent sword beam. Everywhere was filled with white. It was unknown how many sword chi were coming at him from all directions. The 9 Neonate revealed a look of despair. There was nowhere to run. Even if he had 90 heads he would die, let alone 9. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of sword chi tearing flesh could be heard as a blood mist spread. In the blink of an eye, the 9 Neonate vanished and there was only a pile of flesh and mud left on the spot after it was minced by the heaven-slaying sword chi. Chapter 1501 Ling Long's Title. Chapter 1501 Ling Long's Title. If you dare kill me, all of you will have to die. The essence spirit of the god race being was trapped in Su Zimo's palm and howled. Su Zimo's expression was cold and unmoved. Beams of fiend chi extended from the ball of light in his palm and coiled around the god race man's essence spirit rapidly, searching the latter's soul. Ah! The god race man had a pained expression as his essence spirit curled and trembled continuously. Scenes surged into Su Zimo's mind. Su Zimo frowned. Due to the disruption of a mysterious power, the various scenes were blurry. However, all the environments in the man's memories were foreign to Su Zimo. There were obscure words, strange buildings and a weird language. Everything was foreign and did not fit in with Su Zimo's past knowledge. Of course, Tianhuang Mainland was vast and filled with countless mysteries. There were also many regions that Su Zimo had not stepped foot into before. It was not surprising for these scenes to exist in some regions. Poof. Before long, the essence spirit of the god race man exploded. The soul-searching art failed. The entire process was extremely short and Su Zimo did not obtain any useful information. Nian Qi and Extreme Fire walked over as well. Both of them were conjoined body mighty figures. Although they were severely injured earlier on, they were already able to move after resting for a while. How was it? Did you manage to gain anything? Extreme Fire asked. Su Zimo shook his head and said deeply, the background of this god race being is a little strange. I can't say for now, but he shouldn't be from Tianhuang Mainland. Young Master, Senior Extreme Fire, hurry and come over. Right then, Nian Qi walked to the edge of the wall not far away and suddenly shouted. Su Zimo and Extreme Fire walked over and looked up. There were many words left on the wall, but they were covered by spider webs and dust and could not be seen clearly. Su Zimo waved his sleeves gently and dermic powers surged, brushing away the dust and revealing elegant words. The rows of words were neat and tidy. There were only 4 words on the first row. I am Ling Long. Those words were left behind by Fairy Ling Long. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he continued reading hurriedly. After a long time, the 3 of them read the messages on the wall and exchanged glances, looking emotional. Fairy Ling Long truly has good intentions. Nian Qi sighed. Extreme Fire nodded as well. I'm afraid only such a woman is worthy of the eternal human emperor. It's no wonder why Fairy Ling Long's name can spread through history even without the title of an emperor. Through Fairy Ling Long's message, Su Zimo and the other 2 finally understood the origin of this secret ground. It turned out that back when the ancient war broke out, the human race was steadily defeated. At that time, the human emperor was not at his peak and was not at the point where he could suppress the emperors of the primordial races. Against the attacks of the primordial races, human experts suffered immense losses. As for Fairy Ling Long, in order to help the ancient emperors recover, she searched for a primordial divine medicine and that brought her to the Kunlun ruins. The Kunlun barrier existed in the Kunlun ruins. With her powerful perception, Fairy Ling Long noticed a flaw in the barrier and used it to open up a passage between the Kunlun ruins and Tianhuang Mainland. That was the embryonic form of this secret ground. However, the reason why Fairy Ling Long opened up the secret ground was not merely to enter the Kunlun ruins. Her true goal was to leave a way out for the human race. If the human race was defeated in the ancient war, the Kunlun ruins would be their final escape route. That was because this was a forbidden ground for the primordial races. As long as they retreated here, they could at least preserve the bloodline of the human race and pass down their civilization without being destroyed by the primordial races. As for this secret ground, the large number of dermic weapons, cultivation techniques, secret skills and universal treasures were prepared for the humans that retreated to the Kunlun ruins. If the human race had truly reached that point, they would have suffered immense losses with almost no survivors and countless lineages severed. As for those dermic weapons, cultivation techniques, secret skills and universal treasures, they could protect the human race and pass down their civilization. They could accumulate strength and wait for an opportunity to rise once more. Fairy Ling Long did not choose to carry those treasures with her. That was because she knew that she would definitely not retreat in the ancient war. She would fight with the human emperor and the ancient emperors to the end. Even to her last drop of blood, she would protect the dignity of the human race and die without regrets. When Fairy Ling Long left this place, she was already prepared to die. The words here were equivalent to Fairy Ling Long's final words. At that point, Su Zimo and the other two were moved and felt a sense of admiration in their hearts. The three of them bowed deeply towards the wall in unison. That bow was them paying respect to the ancient emperors. That bow was for the eternal human emperor. That bow was for Fairy Ling Long. More than that, that bow was for the countless seniors who perished in the ancient war. They might be unknown or have no surnames or records. However, it was their fervor, corpses and unyielding spirit that created the glory of the human race through history. Su Zimo and the other two stood up and smiled at one another. At the very least, the worst-case scenario did not happen in the ancient war. The human emperor rose and was invincible, suppressing the primordial races and eventually leading the human race to win the ancient war. Fairy Ling Long did not manage to make use of this measure either. That was the reason why this place was sealed until now. Behind the words on the wall were a few lines of words left behind by Fairy Ling Long. I stayed in the Kunlun ruins for a few days and discovered some clues to the primordial war. However, time was pressing and it was difficult for me to divert my attention to check things out. There seems to be something else about the primordial war that doesn't match the rumors. Although there were not many words, they revealed important information. If she did not discover anything, Fairy Ling Long would definitely not spout nonsense and even left behind words to remind her descendants. Su Zimo and the other two frowned slightly in deep thought. The primordial war was too far from now. Nobody knew about what happened in the past and the truth of the primordial war was only known in the Kunlun ruins. At the end of the words, Night Spirit was even mentioned. Night Spirit was a taboo and naturally could not hide from Fairy Ling Long. Initially, Fairy Ling Long's plan was to bring Night Spirit back to Tianhuang Mainland and raise it to fight against the primordial races with it. The reason why there were Kunlun clansmen that died in this secret ground was because Fairy Ling Long took away Night Spirit. They were killed by her here after hunting her to this place. However, at the last minute before Fairy Ling Long left, she changed her mind. Firstly, Night Spirit would definitely require a long time to grow. At that time, the ancient war had already reached its most intense state and there was no time to wait for Night Spirit to grow. Secondly, Fairy Ling Long was worried as well. If she brought Night Spirit back to Tianhuang Mainland, it would bring about unimaginable trouble for Tianhuang Mainland and she would be a sinner. Fairy Ling Long did not wish to return Night Spirit to the Kunlun ruins either. After considering for a long time, she threw Night Spirit here and allowed it to survive on its own. Many years later, Night Spirit left this place with the help of extreme fire and was born and grew in this generation. Chapter 1502 Storage Ring. Chapter 1502 Storage Ring. What's the secret behind the primordial war? Extreme Fire looked at the wall and suddenly asked. Su Zimo smiled gently. Stop guessing. We can only uncover all the secrets after entering the Kunlun ruins. Let's go. Extreme Fire nodded and was about to move. Su Zimo burst into laughter. Master Yu and Yin Qi have yet to recover. It's better for you to rest here for a few days first. There's no hurry. That's true. Extreme Fire smiled. I wonder what sort of situation and danger we'll face upon entering the Kunlun ruins. We should make some preparations. Thereafter, Extreme Fire and Yin Qi recuperated in this secret chamber. Both of them were at the conjoined body realm and had powerful bloodlines. Furthermore, Nian Qi possessed the bloodline of the god race and her regeneration capabilities were shocking. In less than 3 days she had already recovered. On the 5th day Extreme Fire recovered as well. "Let's go!" Extreme Fire shouted. Su Zimo nodded and handed Nian Qi a golden ring. "I took this off the finger of that god race man. There's no reaction when I made contact with it using my dermic powers. Give it a try." Nian Qi received the ring and looked at it curiously before injecting dermic powers. There was still no reaction from the ring. Pondering for a moment, Nian Qi suddenly bit her fingertip and squeezed out a drop of blood, dropping it on the ring. The drop of blood fused rapidly into the ring. Thereafter, Nian Qi was stunned and her eyes were filled with shock. "What's wrong?" Su Zimo asked. Nian Qi composed herself and said in a deep voice, "There's a huge space within this ring and many things can be stored within. It's not inferior to our storage bags." Su Zimo nodded. "My guess is right. This should be a storage ring. However, only the god race can use it." "Young master, there are some books and weapons here." Nian Qi willed the books and weapons out. Extreme Fire casually took a book and skimmed through it. "What's written? I've never seen this before." Extreme Fire frowned slightly. The words in the books were extremely foreign. They were not words of the demon race or humans and were curved and indistinguishable, like heavenly books. The forging of those weapons was completely different from Tianhuang Mainland as well. Su Zimo shook his head too. "I can't understand. Let's keep these items first." Nian Qi obeyed and placed the books and weapons back into her storage ring. Pondering for a moment, Su Zimo said, "Nian Qi, put away this storage ring as well. Don't expose it." They were about to enter the Kunlun ruins and nobody knew who they would face or what situation they would be in. If there were other god race beings in the Kunlun ruins and saw the storage ring, they would definitely be able to guess that the god race man died in their hands. Su Zimo gazed at the corpses of the Kunlun mighty figures thoughtfully. "What's wrong, Zimo?" Extreme Fire asked. Su Zimo said, "Have you guys noticed that the Kunlun clansmen that entered this time round are different from the Kunlun clansmen of the ancient era?" "Different?" Extreme Fire frowned slightly. Nian Qi was puzzled as well. The Kunlun clansmen that died in the ancient era had long rotted with only corpses remaining. It could not be seen what was different about them. Su Zimo pointed to the waists of the Kunlun corpses that entered this time round. "Look, these Kunlun clansmen have gray ribbons tied around their waists. The Kunlun clansmen of the ancient era had purple gold ribbons around their waists." "Indeed, but what does that prove?" Extreme Fire asked with a frown. "I don't know either." Su Zimo shook his head. "Let's go and check out the Kunlun ruins." The three of them headed towards the other end of the secret ground. Before long they arrived at the end of the secret ground. However, there was no path at the end, only a cold wall. Su Zimo conjured hand seals repeatedly with both hands and shot out dermic powers into every corner, shouting softly, "Disperse." The wall before him gradually disappeared and a passage to the outside world appeared. At the entrance connecting the secret ground to the Kunlun ruins, there was a formation set up by Fairy Ling Long. After a long time, a few formation eyes were shattered and the god race man discovered the flaws such that he was able to dispel it. In the past few days, Su Zimo had repaired the formation once more. The foundation of the formation was still present and there was no need to draw any formation patterns. Su Zimo merely had to repair the formation eyes and it could be activated again. That way this secret ground would no longer be discovered by anyone. Su Zimo left the secret ground with Extreme Fire and Nian Qi and entered the Kunlun ruins. The moment the three of them entered the Kunlun ruins, they were shocked. An ancient aura surged over, as though the three of them had traveled back in time to the primordial era in an instant. Due to the existence of the Kunlun barrier, this place was truly isolated from the outside world. Throughout history, only Fairy Ling Long had come to the Kunlun ruins and left alive. These were the most primitive things and traces of the primordial era. All the structures here were far from the current structures. Of course, most of them were already reduced to ruins. Su Zimo and the other two headed in a direction and surveyed their surroundings slowly. Everywhere was filled with ruins and corpses. All the structures were built on the ruins. Even the vegetation was rooted in the ruins. Before long, their expressions changed and they caught sight of another malevolent spirit fruit not far away. Nian Qi surveyed her surroundings and did not find any danger. She then hurried forward and plucked the malevolent spirit fruit, handing it to Su Zimo. Back then, the first malevolent spirit fruit found at the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins was given to Extreme Fire. Naturally, this one was given to Su Zimo. Take it. Su Zimo smiled gently. Nian Qi shook her head stubbornly, still insistent. Su Zimo could only put away the malevolent spirit fruit. The three of them did not walk far when they caught sight of another malevolent spirit fruit. The three of them wandered around the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins for a long time and fought against countless vengeful spirits and malevolent ghosts, but they only obtained a single malevolent spirit fruit. However, they had not gone far in the Kunlun ruins before two were already seen. With that, all three of them had the fruits individually. With the existence of the malevolent spirit fruit, their chances of passing the fire divine power tribulation when breaking through to the Mahayana realm would increase by 30%. The malevolent spirit fruit was long extinct in Tianhuang Mainland. To think that the three of them would obtain three in the Kunlun ruins. The storyteller was right. Although the Kunlun ruins was an unknown place and possessed immense dangers, there were also incredible opportunities. There were countless treasures here and the malevolent spirit fruit was only one of them. Su Zimo's heart was filled with anticipation as well. Perhaps the green lotus true body could grow rapidly here. The main reason why malevolent spirit fruits were so common in the Kunlun ruins was not only because of the unique environment here, but also because the people in the Kunlun ruins did not need them at all. That was because they could not advance to the Mahayana realm. Although the malevolent spirit fruit was a treasure, it was useless for them. Chapter 1503 Kunlun Lord. Chapter 1503, Kunlun Lord. The three of them continued forward. After walking for about an hour, they did not see any signs of the Kunlun race. Strange, where is the Kunlun race? Extreme Fire was puzzled. There's another malevolent spirit fruit there. Nian Qi looked around and caught sight of a malevolent spirit fruit not far away. After a brief pause she continued, however, all three of us have it. There's no point in us eating more of this universal treasure. No worries. Su Zimo said, take it down. You can bring it over to some old friends of Tianhuang Mainland when you leave this place. That's right. Extreme Fire nodded as well. Nobody fought for the malevolent spirit fruit in the Kunlun ruins. However, the various major sects, factions and half-martial ancestors of Tianhuang Mainland would definitely fight to the death for it. Nian Qi strode over. Before long, Su Zimo's expression changed and he suddenly said, Nian Qi, come back. Nian Qi paused and could tell that Su Zimo was warning her. True enough. Not far away dozens of figures sped over. The two leaders had powerful auras and were at the conjoined body realm with Dharma characteristic Tao Lords behind them. All of them charged towards Su Zimo and the other two with an aggressive aura. In the blink of an eye, they arrived and surrounded the three of them with hostile expressions. If he was not wrong, this should be the Kunlun race. Su Zimo swept his gaze across. The Kunlun race beings were all wearing gray ribbons on their waists. They should be the same as the Kunlun race beings who had entered the secret ground a few days ago. Intruders. A conjoined body mighty figure on the left suddenly shouted with a cold expression and a vicious gaze. We are indeed from Tianhuang Mainland. Su Zimo nodded and did not lie. Be it their attires or their auras, the three of them were way too different from the Kunlun race that had lived here for countless years and could not hide at all. Intruders, anyone who trespasses into the Kunlun ruins shall be killed without mercy. The conjoined body mighty figure on the right waved his hand and ordered. The surrounding Dharma characteristic Tao Lords conjured Dharmic arts and summoned Dharmic weapons, wanting to attack. Su Zimo harumphed coldly and flicked his finger. Chi. Two blinding sword chi burst forth from his fingertip. It was a vast expanse of white and killing intent surged into the skies as it slashed towards the two conjoined body mighty figures. The expressions of the two conjoined body mighty figures changed starkly. The sharpness of the heaven-slaying sword chi made both of them shudder. The two conjoined body mighty figures dodged frantically and retreated, but they could not avoid the two heaven-slaying sword chi still. Flashes of blood spewed out. Two arms were tossed high into the air, sliced off by the heaven-slaying sword chi. The most terrifying thing was that the sharpness and destructive power contained by the heaven-slaying sword chi made it impossible for the two conjoined body mighty figures to regrow their limbs. Blood gushed endlessly from the wound. Why you? Just you wait. The two conjoined body mighty figures had panicked expressions and fled into the distance after throwing that casual remark, disappearing in the blink of an eye. I'm Desolate Marshal. Suddenly, Su Zimo spoke, don't forget to mention my name when you head back. The dermic arts of the other Dharma characteristic Tao Lords had just been conjured and had yet to be released. However, they were all dumbfounded when they saw that. Before the two conjoined body mighty figures could attack, they retreated due to the killing intent of the two-sword chi. How could they dare to move? A Dharma characteristic Tao Lord had just attacked with his dermic weapon. Just as it was about to hit Su Zimo, the Dharma characteristic Tao Lord changed directions hurriedly and avoided Su Zimo, summoning his dermic weapon back. Su Zimo glanced over. The Dharma characteristic Tao Lords were scared out of their wits and disappeared before Su Zimo and the other two before long. Su Zimo did not move nor did he chase after them. Zimo, why did you hold back intentionally and let them leave? Extreme Fire asked, these people will definitely attract even stronger existences when they return. If Su Zimo had attacked with his full strength, how could the two heaven-slaying sword chi have only severed two arms? No worries. Su Zimo waved it off. Divine powers are forbidden in the Kunlun ruins, so even the strongest experts are only half-martial ancestors. Half-martial ancestors won't be a threat to us. Although Su Zimo's tone was calm, it was filled with immense confidence. Up till this point of his cultivation, there were very few people in the same cultivation realm who could truly match him. Although the Kunlun ruins had a unique environment with countless treasures, cultivation techniques and secret skills that could nurture many paragons and monster incarnates, Su Zimo was confident that he could suppress all paragons. Su Zimo continued, furthermore, it's inevitable that we'll come into contact with the Kunlun race in the Kunlun ruins. This can be considered a chance. Actually, he had another thought. Night Spirit. Ever since the battle at Heaven and Earth Valley, Night Spirit's whereabouts were unknown and his fate was unknown. If Night Spirit was still alive, there was a high chance he could be in the Kunlun ruins. The reason why Su Zimo reported his Dao title earlier on was to spread the news with the help of the two conjoined body mighty figures. If Night Spirit was in the Kunlun race, he would definitely know that he was here. The three of them continued forward. Before long, figures appeared not far away. This time round, there were only a dozen or so figures, but their auras were much stronger. The leader was a half-martial ancestor expert with gray hair. Although he was skinny, his demonic chi surged. The dozens of figures behind him were all conjoined body mighty figures. The two conjoined body mighty figures who had their arms severed by Su Zimo initially were in the middle as well. The two mighty figures' arms had already recovered to normal. It was clear that an expert had helped to erase the sword chi from the wounds on the two of them, allowing their dermic powers to surge and regrow their limbs. Who is Desolate Marshal? The gray-haired man in the lead approached and asked slowly. Commander, that's him. One of the conjoined body mighty figures who escaped stood out hurriedly and pointed at Su Zimo. You're Desolate Marshal? The gray-haired man narrowed his eyes and shone with a cold glint in deep thought. A moment later he suddenly said, Follow me. Master wants to see you. Who is your master? Su Zimo asked. Our master is naturally the master of the Kunlun ruins, the Kunlun Lord. The gray-haired man said proudly, Follow me. You'll know after you meet my master. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he nodded to Extreme Fire and Yen Qi. The gray-haired man led the way. Su Zimo and the other two followed closely behind. Along the way, Su Zimo actually felt nervous and hopeful. Given Night Spirit's capabilities, there was definitely a chance for him to become the Kunlun Lord. Could it be Night Spirit? Everyone advanced at an extremely fast speed. After walking for about 2 hours, they did not encounter many Kunlun clansmen. Su Zimo frowned and asked, The Kunlun race should be massive. Why are there so few of you? That's because most of our clansmen have gone to exterminate the traitors. The gray-haired man said indifferently. After a brief pause, he continued, Be careful of your words after meeting my master. Say whatever you think. Otherwise, all three of you will die if my master is enraged. Chapter 1504, Kneel. 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 Chapter 1504, Kneel. 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 Under the lead of the gray-haired man, Su Zimo and the other two advanced. The Kunlun mighty figures that followed him looked at the three of them with clear hostility. They surrounded the three of them as though they were afraid that they would escape. A long time later, a massive palace appeared before them. It spanned hundreds of kilometers and was grand and extravagant. Every single tile and brick was made from the best materials. The design of the palace was antiquated as well. A patrolling team of Kunlun clansmen passed by everyone. When they saw the gray-haired man, they knelt on the ground respectfully and greeted, "Greetings, Commander." Yes. The gray-haired man nodded with a calm and dignified expression. Waving his hand, he said, "Rise." Upon hearing that, the patrolling Kunlun clansmen stood up and left. The gray-haired man turned around and glared at Su Zimo and the other two before saying coldly, "Remember, you have to kneel and greet the Kunlun Lord." When he heard that, Extreme Fire revealed a disdainful expression. Who was he? He was the top weapon refinement grandmaster of Tianhuang Mainland, and countless conjoint body mighty figures sought his help in weapon refinement. Furthermore, he was a mighty figure that ruled over a region and had torrential combat strength. How could he kneel to anyone casually? What Kunlun Lord? You sure are cocky. Extreme Fire sneered internally but did not say anything. Nianqi was expressionless. She only listened to Su Zimo. If he wanted her to kneel, she would. Su Zimo's expression was calm and no one could read his emotions. The gray-haired man raised his brow slightly and sneered, "Don't blame me for reminding you guys, but this is the Kunlun ruins. There are rules to the Kunlun ruins. I don't care how strong you guys are in Tianhuang Mainland. In the Kunlun ruins, even if you're a dragon, you'll have to sprawl obediently. Anyone who doesn't obey the rules of the Kunlun ruins shall be killed without mercy." Su Zimo was still silent and had no reaction to the gray-haired man's threat. He was neither afraid nor furious. His thoughts were simple. If the Kunlun Lord was Night Spirit, everything would be fine. Naturally, Night Spirit would not make him kneel either. However, if the Kunlun Lord was not Night Spirit, there was no one in this world who could force him to kneel. Even Mahayana patriarchs could not do it. The gray-haired man led Su Zimo and the others forward. After passing through many palaces, a gigantic sacrificial platform appeared before them and stood tall. Countless living beings of different races stood around the sacrificial platform. However, every single living being had a gray ribbon tied around their waists. Their cultivation realms were different and they were densely packed. There were at least 10 million of them. Among them, there were many conjoint body mighty figures and half-martial ancestor experts. All of those living beings were from the Kunlun race. The army of so many powerful living beings was well-disciplined, orderly and murderous. It looked extremely shocking. Even in Tianhuang Mainland, there had never been such a scene. Cultivators of a super sect, including Qi refinement warriors, amounted to 1 million at most. There were so many Kunlun clansmen that could roughly be divided into 5 massive teams. They occupied different regions and surrounded the sacrificial platform. Among them, a half-martial ancestor with a terrifying aura stood at the front of 4 teams and looked to be of noble status. In order to get rid of the rebellion in the Kunlun ruins this time round, Master gathered 10 armies. 5 of them are here and the other 5 are fighting against the traitors at the front. The 4 half-martial ancestors you see are the commanders of 4 armies. Su Zimo swept his gaze. The position of the 5th army commander was empty. If he was not wrong, the gray-haired man beside him should be the commander of the 5th army. With so many powerful living beings gathered together, an incomparably powerful aura reverberated around the palace. If millions of Kunlun clansmen were to attack at the same time, they could probably crush any conjoint body mighty figure or half-martial ancestor expert into pieces. Even Extreme Fire and Nianqi were secretly shocked and their expressions changed slightly when they saw such a majestic scene. Among the 3 of them, Su Zimo was the only one who remained calm the entire time. Of course, the most striking thing was not the Kunlun army. It was the few people on the sacrificial platform in the middle. In the middle of the sacrificial platform was a throne made of gigantic bones. Every single bone was a dragon bone, and even after countless years, they still emitted a powerful dragon chi. This was a true dragon throne. Someone sat on the throne. It was a bald burly man with a mighty figure and a mighty aura. Just by sitting there casually, he was like the master who controlled the world. An army of 10 million would obey the orders of a single person. This is the Kunlun Lord. The gray-haired man said proudly. A look of disappointment flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. Initially he thought that the Kunlun Lord might be Night Spirit. To think that it was a stranger. Although there were many living beings around the platform, he could not spot Night Spirit. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes and looked towards the Kunlun Lord. The Kunlun Lord exuded an extremely evil aura like a gigantic abyss that could devour everything. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. Although the Kunlun Lord was not human, he could not tell what his true form was. Behind the Kunlun Lord stood 3 handsome men in white robes. Although they were disguised, Su Zimo recognized them instantly. The God race. The 3 of them were dressed exactly the same as the God race being who died in his hands in the Ling Long secret ground. Su Zimo remained silent. At that moment, the gray-haired man had already descended on the sacrificial platform with Su Zimo and the other 2. Wuxia, you are back. The Kunlun Lord smiled and said. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. The mouth of the Kunlun Lord nearly reached his ears when he smiled. It was so huge that it gave off a creepy feeling. Greetings, master. The gray-haired man called Wuxia knelt on the ground hurriedly and bowed respectfully. Su Zimo and the other 2 did not move. The Kunlun Lord swept his gaze and the smile on his face vanished. Intruders, why aren't you kneeling at the sight of the Kunlun Lord? Wuxia asked with a ferocious gaze. Kneel, kneel, kneel. The millions of living beings beneath let out a series of furious roars as demonic chi surged into the air with a mighty aura that shook the world. Even with Extreme Fire's powerful mental fortitude, he felt immense pressure at this moment. I don't have that habit. Su Zimo replied nonchalantly. Killing intent flashed in the eyes of Wuxia as he looked towards the Kunlun Lord who was sitting on the dragon throne instinctively. The Kunlun Lord was expressionless and closed his eyes slowly. Wuxia understood and revealed a menacing expression as he leaped up from the ground. His blood chi surged and he lunged towards Su Zimo. Since you refuse to kneel, die. Wuxia's long hair was filled with blood that suddenly squirmed, turning into small gray snakes. They bared their foul and toxic fangs and spat their forked tongues, biting towards Su Zimo. Chapter 1505 New Commander. Chapter 1505 New Commander. Su Zimo's expression turned cold. If the Kunlun Lord was not Night Spirit, it meant that this Commander Wuxia before them had nothing to do with Night Spirit. Su Zimo would have no reservations killing this man. You want to kill me? Su Zimo reached out and grabbed Wuxia's head. Every single hair on Wuxia's head was a gray snake. They were dense and shocking, there was no way of attacking. You overestimate yourself. When he saw that Su Zimo dared to grab with his bare hands, Wuxia could not help but sneer. However, his expression changed instantly. Just as Su Zimo's palm was about to descend on his head, an extremely sharp sword chi burst forth from his palm. Tiske, tiske, tsk. Beams of sword chi burst forth and severed the gray snakes on his head instantly, spewing blood. Wuxia's expression changed starkly as he burst in retreat and escaped from the mincing sword chi. His blood chi surged and he reverted to his true form in the blink of an eye. It was a pure-blooded ferocious beast, the hook snake. However, the moment his massive body was conjured, Su Zimo had already closed in and pushed down his head violently. Bang! Before Wuxia could react, Su Zimo had already pushed his head down onto the sacrificial platform. It was unknown what materials were used to build the sacrificial platform, but it was indestructible. When the hook snake's head was smashed onto the surface, the sacrificial platform was intact. However, the hook snake's face was smashed beyond recognition and its skull was shattered. The Kunlun Lord opened his eyes with a hint of surprise. One had to understand that only the strongest half-martial ancestors were qualified to be the commanders of the 10 armies under his lead. Among the 10 commanders, although Wuxia was not the strongest, he was ranked top 5. Furthermore, this green-robed cultivator was only at the conjoint body realm. However, Wuxia was a half-martial ancestor. The moment both parties exchanged blows, it was a crushing defeat for Wuxia. An uproar broke out beneath the sacrificial platform as well. In the hearts of the Kunlun race, the statuses of the commanders were second only to the Kunlun Lord. Every single one of them was invincible and not to be challenged. However, they had not expected their commander to be suppressed by an outsider. It was not over yet. Wuxia wanted to struggle and stand up, but Su Zimo did not give him the chance. He strode forward and stomped down on Wuxia's head. The entire platform shook. Under countless gazes, one of the 10 great commanders of the Kunlun race, Wuxia had his head crushed by Su Zimo's foot and his essence spirit was destroyed, dying on the spot. Instantly the entire place fell silent. Nobody expected this outcome. As a half-martial ancestor expert, he was stomped to death by Su Zimo before he could even unleash half of his combat strength. Wuxia had not expected that Su Zimo would dare attack. Less than that, he had not expected Su Zimo to dare kill him right in the Kunlun ruins and in front of the Kunlun Lord, in front of everyone. "Intruder, you have a death wish." Roar. Howl. The four commanders below reacted and reverted to their true forms one after another. With a series of roars, they descended on the sacrificial platform and encircled Su Zimo. "Kill him! Kill him!" The many Kunlun clansmen below gradually snapped out of their stupor as well. Their eyes were filled with blood as they roared. Piak, piak, piak. Right then someone clapped gently. The clamor above and below the sacrificial platform disappeared before long. The four commanders shuddered as well and retreated slowly with a hint of fear in their eyes. There was only a single person in the Kunlun ruins with such prestige. On the dragon throne, the Kunlun Lord clapped and nodded slightly. Ruthless, savage and strong. I like it. After a brief pause, he suddenly asked, "You're Desolate Marshal?" "That's right," Su Zimo replied. "How did you guys enter from Tianhuang Mainland?" The Kunlun Lord asked again. "With the Kunlun barrier, under normal circumstances, you guys won't be able to enter. Initially we were indeed blocked outside. Later on, for some unknown reason, a node appeared on this barrier and we seized that opportunity to enter the Kunlun ruins through it." Su Zimo was long prepared and would naturally not reveal anything about the Ling Long's secret ground. "Oh." The Kunlun Lord was still expressionless as he asked, "Where is that node?" Su Zimo pointed in a random direction. "It's useless even if we search for it now. The node has already vanished." "You're lying." Suddenly, the gaze of the Kunlun Lord intensified with a sinister glint. The moment the Kunlun Lord said that, he had already vanished from the dragon throne. It was too fast. Before Extreme Fire and Yen Qi could react, an evil and terrifying aura had already descended before them. "Watch out!" Su Zimo hollered and swept his arm casually, pushing Extreme Fire and Yen Qi to the side. His blood qi burst forth and the sound of a tsunami burst forth from his body. Bang, bang, bang. By the time Extreme Fire and Yen Qi balanced themselves, the Kunlun Lord and Su Zimo were already fighting. The two figures intertwined on the sacrificial platform and fought with speed. In just a few breaths, both parties had punched at least 100 times. The bloodline of the Kunlun Lord was also channeled to the tsunami blood realm. This Kunlun Lord is very strong. Extreme Fire was secretly alarmed. Although Su Zimo did not release his full strength, there were very few experts who could match him to this extent in melee combat. At the very least, he and Yen Qi were definitely not a match for the Kunlun Lord. Suddenly, the two of them clashed once more and separated instantly. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, the Kunlun Lord reared his head in laughter and his mouth opened so wide that it almost reached the back of his head. He bared his menacing fangs in a terrifying manner. Great, great. There was no sign of anger on the face of the Kunlun Lord as he laughed. Su Zimo's expression was indifferent as he looked at the Kunlun Lord quietly. "Desolate Marshal, why have you come to the Kunlun ruins?" the Kunlun Lord asked. Su Zimo said, "I heard that there are many treasures here. We want to cultivate in the Kunlun ruins for a period of time and borrow the treasures here to raise our cultivation." "All right." The Kunlun Lord said, "All the treasures in the Kunlun ruins are under my control. As long as you need them, I can provide them all to you." "Oh." Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he asked, "On what condition?" The Kunlun Lord said slowly, "Now that Wuxia is dead, you're the new commander of that army. I want you to follow me and kill the traitors of the Kunlun ruins." A commotion broke out beneath the sacrificial platform. Nobody expected that instead of taking revenge for Wuxia after his death, the Kunlun Lord even promoted the intruder who killed him to be the commander of an army. "I don't care about background or origin, I only care about your ability." The Kunlun Lord said, "The position of the commander belongs to the capable. Even if you're an intruder, I'll hold you in high regards." "Master, what about the feud of Commander Wuxia?" A Kunlun mighty figure could not help but stand out. "Are you dissatisfied with my decision?" The Kunlun Lord glanced sideways. I. The Kunlun mighty figure shuddered with a fearful expression and did not dare to continue. Die then? Suddenly, the Kunlun lord opened his mouth and a tremendous suction force burst forth. The Kunlun mighty figure could not defend against it at all and was devoured by the Kunlun lord. Chapter 1506, Leader of the Traitors. Chapter 1506, Leader of the Traitors. Everyone was silent. The clamor from before quietened down instantly. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of bones being crushed sounded from the Kunlun lord's mouth in a shuddering manner. Scarlet blood seeped out slowly from the gaps between the Kunlun lord's teeth. The Kunlun lord licked his lips and swallowed the blood. All the Kunlun race beings looked at the Kunlun lord with fear in their eyes. Su Zimo remained silent. He was not interested in the position of commander or the extermination of the traitors. However, on second thought, there was no harm in that. Furthermore, he could use this opportunity to understand more about the Kunlun ruins and might even be able to discover the truth of the primordial war. Desolate Marshal, what do you think? The Kunlun lord asked slowly. No problem. Su Zimo nodded and shifted his gaze to the few white-robed god race beings not far away, asking in a seemingly casual manner, These are guests of the Kunlun ruins and are also helpers I found. The Kunlun lord was extremely cautious as well and did not reveal the fact that the few of them were from the god race. Seems like the traitors in the Kunlun ruins are rather troublesome to deal with. Even you can't suppress them and have to look for help? Su Zimo raised his brow. The Kunlun lord sneered, They're just small fries. It's just that the traitor leader is a little difficult to deal with. You'll know when you see him later on. After a brief pause, he said with a fake smile, Desolate Marshal, it's not that I look down on you. If it was a one-on-one fight, you might not be a match for that traitor leader. Oh, I'm looking forward to it then, Su Zimo said indifferently. It was clear that the Kunlun lord was agitating him intentionally. Although Su Zimo said that he was looking forward to it, he was unmoved. When should we move? Su Zimo asked. Tomorrow morning, I'll personally lead the army to conquer the rebellion. The Kunlun lord said, You can rest for the day today. Men, bring Commander Desolate Marshal to the palace to rest. Bring the most beautiful demoness in my palace over and reward her to Commander Desolate Marshal. The Kunlun lord waved his hand. There's no need. Su Zimo waved it off. The three of them followed a Kunlun clansman down the platform towards a palace. Before long, they disappeared from everyone's sights. This Desolate Marshal is sharp and decisive in killing. He's not easy to control. Do you really intend to take him under your wing? A white-robed god race being walked to the side of the Kunlun lord and suddenly asked. The Kunlun lord smiled gently. This person's combat strength isn't weak. It's a pity to kill him. Why don't we use him to deal with that beast? Once this battle is over, he'll naturally die. The Kunlun lord licked his lips with a greedy expression. I can smell an extremely powerful and fresh blood chi from him. This person's flesh must be a great tonic. Be careful, don't hurt your teeth. Another god race being laughed. Foo. The Kunlun lord grinned. Don't worry, I didn't use my full strength when I fought him earlier on. Furthermore, you guys are here too, aren't it? These three intruders won't be able to cause much trouble. Suddenly, a god race being said, I'm worried about something. Oh. The Kunlun lord looked over. The god race being said deeply, that beast returned from Tianhuang Mainland and the three of them are from Tianhuang Mainland as well. What if they know one another? 1. The Kunlun lord burst into laughter. How can there be such a coincidence in the world? So what if they know each other? That beast can't hold on for much longer. Desolate Marshal isn't a fool. If he knows how to judge the situation, he knows who he should help. Pausing for a moment, he retracted the smile on his face and said coldly, However, if he truly has any ill intentions, I'll devour him alive right away. In a palace in the Kunlun ruins. Su Zimo sat in a lotus position on a bed and rubbed his glabella gently with his fingers, deep in thought. Extreme fire and yen qi searched everywhere in the palace and only returned to Su Zimo's side after ensuring that there were no dangers or abnormalities. Extreme Fire asked, Zimo, are you really intending to help this Kunlun lord exterminate some traitors? He seems violent and bloodthirsty, not a kind soul. I agree. Nianqi nodded. This Kunlun Lord is capricious and can kill at any moment. Now that he invited you to be the commander, there's a high chance he'll turn to deal with you after the battle is over. Yes. Su Zimo nodded. I've thought of everything you guys are worried about. Since this Kunlun Lord can rule over the Kunlun race and threaten the Kunlun ruins, he's not weak. He did not use his full strength when he fought me earlier on. Of course I held back as well. Let's follow them and check out the situation first. We'll be on guard and adapt to the situation at that time. Alright, since you're prepared, I won't worry anymore, Extreme Fire nodded. Right? Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, can you guys sense what's the true form of the Kunlun Lord? Both Extreme Fire and Nianqi shook their heads. To be able to intimidate everyone in the Kunlun ruins, his true form should not be an ordinary demon beast, Su Zimo murmured. Could it be one of the primordial races? Extreme Fire said. Su Zimo shook his head. No. I checked with my spirit consciousness on the sacrificial platform earlier on. There are no other primordial races in the Kunlun ruins. However, the strange thing is why the god race appeared in the Kunlun ruins. Extreme Fire and Nianqi were puzzled as well. Furthermore, the three god race beings did not know Su Zimo. In other words, the three god race beings were not from Tianhuang Mainland. However, if they were not from Tianhuang Mainland, where did they come from? Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled what the storyteller said. It seemed like in the primordial era, there were 8 primordial races and the god race was not among them. 8 primordial races, god race, Kunlun, taboo and primordial war. Su Zimo had a feeling that the god race must have played an extremely important role in the primordial war. The god race might be the key to uncovering the truth of the primordial war. However, the power of this Kunlun Lord sure is terrifying. Extreme Fire sighed. Apart from Mahayana patriarchs and emperors, the power of this Kunlun Lord is even more terrifying than any super sect in Tianhuang Mainland. His strength was consolidated through history after all, Nianqi said. To think that there would be traitors in the Kunlun race. Extreme Fire continued, from the looks of it, the strength of the traitor army isn't weak either. To think that the Kunlun Lord would mobilize such a large force. I wonder who this traitor leader is to be able to go against a half-martial ancestor like the Kunlun Lord and even cause him such cautiousness. The narrator was casual but the listener was attentive. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and a thought flashed through his mind. There was a possibility. Could it be? Chapter 1507 Paintings. Chapter 1507 Paintings. What's wrong? Extreme Fire and Nianqi could not help but ask when they saw the change in Su Zimo's expression. Su Zimo said slowly, Night Spirit. What? Extreme Fire and Extreme Fire exclaimed in shock. That was a rather bold guess. However, upon careful thought, it was not impossible. If Night Spirit was still alive, he would have searched for Su Zimo long ago on Tianhuang Mainland. The most likely place for him to appear was the Kunlun ruins. That was because this land was closely related to Night Spirit. This was Night Spirit's home. Night Spirit's ancestor was buried in this land. Furthermore, given Night Spirit's combat strength, if he had returned, he would definitely not be unknown here. There was a high chance that Night Spirit could become an overlord and fight against the Kunlun Lord. What are we waiting for then? Nianqi said in a deep voice, let's kill our way out now and meet with Night Spirit. There's no hurry. Su Zimo had a calm expression. Firstly, this is only my speculation and isn't confirmed yet. Secondly, even if the traitor leader is truly Night Spirit, there's no need for us to rush now. Extreme Fire nodded as well. The Kunlun Lord is leading an army to fight personally tomorrow. This means that the situation over there should be in a stalemate and Night Spirit can still hold out. If we stay here, we can know every single move of the Kunlun Lord. That's much more useful than killing our way out now. There's no hurry. We'll know the truth tomorrow. Su Zimo said faintly. The three of them did not sleep the entire night. The next morning, Su Zimo and the other two arrived at the sacrificial platform early. The Kunlun army had not left and was guarding this place for the entire night. About an hour later, the Kunlun Lord and 3 white-robed god race beings descended on the sacrificial platform. Everyone. The Kunlun Lord surveyed his surroundings and declared, I've just received news that the traitors have been defeated. Our Kunlun army has already attacked their lair. Right now there aren't many traitors left and they're guarding the god-slaying valley with their lives. The Kunlun Lord waved his arm and shouted, "Everyone follow me! Kill the traitors and flatten the valley! Kill the traitors and flatten the valley! Kill the traitors and flatten the valley!" The Kunlun race beneath roared in a terrifying manner. The Kunlun Lord pressed his hands against the air to indicate silence and said, "Clansmen, the guests I invited will arrive at the Kunlun ruins today as well. At that time we'll join forces with them and attack from the front and back. We'll definitely be able to kill all the traitors in God-slaying valley. Kill, kill, kill." The Kunlun army roared. The Kunlun Lord continued, "At that time, these guests will help us dispel the Kunlun barrier and we can leave this place and return to Tianhuang Mainland. At that time, we can advance to the Mahayana realm and comprehend divine powers. At that time, we can break free from the restraints of heaven and earth and our lifespans will increase. At that time, we can dominate a part of Tianhuang Mainland instead of being trapped in these ruins without any reputation." The Kunlun race beneath howled excitedly. The words of the Kunlun Lord were infectious. However, right from the beginning, Su Zimo was expressionless. He was curious who the guests mentioned by the Kunlun Lord were. The God race. Would the God race come to the Kunlun ruins? "Let's go." The Kunlun Lord waved his hand. The Kunlun army soldiers stood up one after another and rode on gigantic spirit vessels and warships, speeding towards the west with a murderous intent. The Kunlun Lord, 3 God race beings, Su Zimo and the other 4 commanders were leading a massive warship. Everyone stood on the deck of the vessel against the wind. "How do we differentiate the traitors from our Kunlun army?" Suddenly Su Zimo asked. "Extremely easy." The Kunlun Lord laughed. "The Kunlun race under my lead has gray ribbons tied around their waists. As for those traitors, they have purple gold ribbons. All you have to remember is to kill all living beings with the purple gold ribbons." Su Zimo nodded. After pausing for a moment, Su Zimo asked again, "What's the background of this traitor leader? He seems to have quite a bit of prestige and can even gather an army to fight against you." "Foo-foo." The Kunlun Lord sneered, "It's just a beast that returned from outside. He's merely relying on his bloodline and the reputation left behind by his ancestors." The people that followed him were all stubborn old fogies. A cold glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. He was almost certain that the so-called traitor leader was Night Spirit. At the thought of meeting Night Spirit, Su Zimo's heart burned. There was nothing more important to him than Night Spirit's survival. The army sped forward with all their might. About 2 hours later, countless corpses could be seen piled on the ruins in the wilderness. The rivers of blood were formed not long ago. Some of the corpses had purple gold ribbons tied around their waists. Some of them had gray ribbons. It could be deduced that this was the first battlefield. The battlefield extended into the distance. Corpses were strewn everywhere and became more concentrated. It was clear how tragic the battle was. Before long, not far ahead, a gigantic palace could be seen. The top of the hall was already shattered and smashed, leaving only 4 walls standing. "This is the lair of those traitors." The Kunlun Lord pointed at the dilapidated palace and laughed. "However, it has been completely occupied by my army." Su Zimo focused his gaze. On the walls of the dilapidated palace, he saw vivid paintings that seemed to be describing something. "What is that?" Su Zimo pointed at the paintings on the wall and suddenly asked. The Kunlun Lord swept his gaze casually and pouted. "It's just some old history related to the Primordial War. It's all long in the past." The Primordial War. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. "I'll go down and take a look." "Up to you. However, you're the commander of the new army. Don't linger too long. We'll wait for you at the God-slaying valley," the Kunlun Lord reminded. He was not worried that Su Zimo and the other 2 would escape. Nobody could escape from his control in the Kunlun ruins. In a flash, Su Zimo leaped down from the warship. Extreme Fire and Yen Qi followed closely behind. The spirit vessels of the Kunlun army streaked past the palace and sped towards the west. Stepping on the corpses and ruins, Su Zimo arrived at the entrance of the palace and paused for a moment. He had a hunch. This palace might very well uncover the true secret of the Primordial War. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo entered the palace and looked at the first painting on his left. The first painting was simple, it merely showed a long and deep valley. At the end of the valley stood a gigantic cave. The cave surged with a rainbow glow and was unfathomable. A few figures walked out from the rainbow cave. Chapter 1508 God's Mainland. Chapter 1508 God's Mainland. This valley. Nian Qi turned her head slightly and murmured, I heard from the Kunlun Lord mention a valley called the God-slaying Valley. Could this be there? It's possible. Extreme Fire nodded. The three of their gazes landed on the few people who walked out of the rainbow cave. Their characteristics were way too obvious. They had golden hair, blue eyes and were tall with handsome features. The God race. The three of them exchanged glances and could see the shock in the other's eyes. The painting was simple and ordinary, merely showing that. However, there were two small words beneath the painting. Instinctively, Su Zimo murmured softly, God's Mainland. What does that mean? Extreme Fire and Yan Qi frowned slightly in confusion. God's Mainland. Murmuring softly, Su Zimo walked forward and looked at the second painting. The style in this painting changed drastically. Although it was still in the valley, it was dyed red with blood and many corpses were piled in the valley. All of those corpses were corpses of the God race. Above the corpses of the God race beings stood two menacing demon beasts that were howling in the direction of the rainbow cave. Although it was only a painting, the three of them could still sense the terrifying aura of the demon beasts, as though they could penetrate the walls. It was shocking. All three of them were shocked. That was because the menacing demon beasts looked exactly the same as Night Spirit's true body. However, their bodies were much larger. One of them was purple and comparatively slender. One of them was golden and had an extremely strong body. That was a primordial taboo, Hou. Furthermore, these were two Hous. A male and a female. Extreme Fire was dumbfounded for a moment before exclaiming, Heavens! In the primordial era, the taboo race had two Hous. At the end of the valley, God race beings were still spilling out from the cave that shone with a rainbow luster. One after another, the God race beings walked out of the cave and charged towards the two Hous. The scene froze. The painting was lifelike. When the three of them stood before it, it was as though they had traveled back in time to the primordial era and were witnessing the battle personally. However, there were still countless questions in their eyes. Su Zimo looked down. Below the painting there were also some small words, God race invasion. Nian Qi's heart skipped a beat when she saw those words. Su Zimo and Extreme Fire were stunned as well. The two of them turned back instinctively and looked at the first painting. The information revealed by connecting the two paintings was way too much. After a momentary silence, Extreme Fire attempted, Is this so-called God's Mainland in existence similar to Tianhuang Mainland? Probably. Su Zimo nodded. The universe is vast and boundless. There must be countless worlds like Tianhuang Mainland. In other words, the God race was not an existence of Tianhuang Mainland. They were the true outsiders. With that, there were many things that could be explained. The bloodline and cultivation techniques of the God race were extremely different from the various races of Tianhuang Mainland. After the bloodline of the God race was awakened, they were born with bloodline phenomenons. The records left behind by Fairy Ling long stated that the primordial era consisted of 8 primordial races and did not include the God race. It was also because the God race had not appeared in Tianhuang Mainland right in the beginning. The foreign words in the storage bag of the God race being that Su Zimo killed in the Kunlun ruins were from the God race. The world and the memories of the God race man should be the God's Mainland. Extreme Fire looked at the rainbow cave in the second painting and said sternly, From the looks of it, this cave should be the tunnel that connects Tianhuang Mainland and God's Mainland. Only by passing through here can the God race enter Tianhuang Mainland. Su Zimo nodded and continued reading. The third painting still showed the deep valley, but peace had returned to it. The purple Hou and golden Hou leaned against one another and sat at the top of the valley. An egg laid quietly in the embrace of two Hous. At the other end of the valley, some God race beings were fleeing in panic. Below the third painting were small words as well, Son of Divine Hou. Extreme Fire said in a deep voice, From the looks of it, this purple Hou gave birth to a son and the golden Hou took care of him day and night. Some of the God race beings seized this opportunity to pass through the tunnel and enter Tianhuang Mainland. Su Zimo nodded. It was easy to connect the events of the primordial era through these paintings. The three of them continued forward and looked at the fourth painting. Finally, the valley was gone from the fourth painting. There were many living beings drawn on it. Apart from the god race, the dragon, Kun, and the other races of the primordial 8 races were present. Not only that, there were 2 even more terrifying demon beasts in the fourth painting with auras similar to the divine Hou. The taboo dragon phoenix. The taboo Kun Peng. Many primordial races gathered and some god race beings stood in the middle, as though they were talking to the surrounding primordial races, the dragon phoenix and Kun Peng. There were small words beneath the fourth painting as well, discord sowed by the god race. At that point, many things were clear even without the three of them looking further. In the primordial era, the Hou might have been bloodthirsty and aloof, at odds with the primordial races, the dragon phoenix and Kun Peng. However, the true cause of the primordial war was the god race. The god race invasion was the invasion of another civilization. If the defense against them failed, the civilization of Tianhuang Mainland would have vanished completely and all the other races would have been enslaved by the god race. The divine house realized how terrifying this matter was and guarded Kunlun to stop the god race. However, due to the birth of the son of the divine house, the god race seized the opportunity to enter Tianhuang Mainland. They instigated the other 2 taboos and the primordial 8 races to wage war against the divine house, triggering that earth-shaking primordial war. Nian Qi's expression was a little pale. No matter what, the bloodline of the god race flowed within her. She had not expected that it would be her ancestors who triggered the greatest catastrophe in Tianhuang Mainland and indirectly destroyed the 3 taboos and countless races. The fifth painting. The scene had already shifted to the Kunlun mountain range. The male golden hour defended the peak of the Kunlun mountain. Under his lead were 4 demon beasts with torrential demonic chi and terrifying auras. Beneath the 4 demon beasts were countless living beings. Among the thousands of races, many of them stood on the side of the divine Hou. Su Zimo's gaze gathered slightly and landed on a demon beast under the lead of the divine Hou. This demon beast was unique. It had the body of a goat, the face of a human, eyes beneath its armpits, teeth of a tiger and hands of a human. Grayish-black all over, its mouth was extremely terrifying and almost extended to the back of its head, as though it could devour millions of living beings. I got it. Su Zimo pointed at the demon beast and suddenly said, the Kunlun Lord should be a Tao Tai one. This Tao Tai should be the Kunlun Lord's ancestor. The Tao Tai was extremely gluttony and ate everything. Legend has it that when the Tao Tai turned ruthless, it would even dare to eat the primordial races. Furthermore, the Tao Tai had a huge appetite. Even primordial races like the dragon and Kun races could not compare to his appetite. Even in the primordial era, the notorious Tao Tai was not weaker than the primordial races. If not for the fact that there were only a few of them, the Tao Tai could have been ranked among the primordial races. Chapter 1509 Guarding Kunlun. Chapter 1509, Guarding Kunlun. The fifth painting showed the golden Hou leading the 10,000 races to fight against the dragon phoenix and Kun Peng, who led a massive army of the primordial 8 races as well as many other living beings. Although it was only a single painting, it displayed the majestic scene of the primordial war before their very eyes. All 3 of them were mighty figures who ruled over a region. Furthermore, Su Zimo was the #1 monster incarnate in history and could suppress anyone of the same cultivation realm as well as half-martial ancestors. Unless a patriarch appeared, it was difficult for anyone to fight against him. However, the 3 of them felt as insignificant as a speck of dust in the face of that magnificent battlefield. They were way too ordinary in such a battle. The moment the battle broke out, they might be drowned. What? Why doesn't the divine Hou explain? It was still difficult for Nian Qi to accept the fact right now. Perhaps out of disdain? Su Zimo looked at the figure in the painting that stood at the peak of Kunlun with its head raised. Even against 2 taboos, the dragon phoenix and Kun Peng, as well as the army of the primordial 8 races, it was still fearless. The painting was extremely lifelike. In fact, the pride, disdain, coldness and killing intent in the golden Hou's eyes were completely revealed. Extreme fire shook his head as well. Given the development of the situation, it's not something that can be explained with a few words. Beneath the fifth painting were the words, Primordial War. Suddenly, Extreme Fire frowned. Strange, why isn't that purple Hou in the painting? Given the painting skills of this master, there's no way he would make such a mistake. Instinctively, Su Zimo looked towards the sixth painting. The sixth painting was back to the god-slaying valley. In the valley there was a demon beast with a torrential killing intent. Its back was facing Tianhuang mainland and it was facing the cave with a rainbow luster, roaring in rage. That demon beast was the female purple Hou. Countless god race beings were surging out of that cave. Some of them wore heavy armor that shone with a golden glow. Some of them rode on divine dragons that resembled gigantic lizards with wings. Some of them rode on tall, armored horses and wielded spears. It was an army of the god race. Previously the god race was merely testing the waters. This time round the god race had truly launched an attack on Tianhuang mainland. The god race experts at the lead had terrifying auras and a mere painting was enough for the three of them to feel suffocated. Those were emperors of the god race. Furthermore there was more than one. Beneath this painting were the same words as those on the fifth painting, Primordial War. I got it. Extreme Fire said in a deep voice, while the Dragon Phoenix, Kunpeng and the Primordial 8 races launched the Primordial War against Kunlun, the God race launched a war against Tianhuang mainland as well. Everyone only knows of the earth-shaking battle outside Kunlun. However, they don't know that in the depths of Kunlun, there was a divine Hou who blocked the god-slaying valley with its back against Tianhuang mainland, defending against the god race army single-handedly to protect Kunlun. This was the true Primordial War. The three of them watched everything in a daze and for some reason their eyes reddened. Throughout history the world had misunderstood the divine Hou. The divine Hou was a taboo. However, he was not the god of massacre, but a true god that protected Tianhuang mainland. The three of them could not imagine what would have happened to Tianhuang mainland if not for the two divine Hous defending Kunlun. After standing in front of the two paintings for a long time, the three of them continued forward and arrived before the seventh painting. From the seventh painting, it could be roughly seen that the Primordial War had ended. The Kunlun mountain range had been reduced to ruins. Corpses were strewn everywhere and blood stained the vast skies. Mountains and rivers collapsed, the firmaments were pierced and the stars were destroyed. It was a tragic sight. There were countless corpses of the god race piled up in the god-slaying valley. No more god race beings came out from the Rainbow Cave. The purple Hou laid limply on the corpses of many god race beings. Although it was covered in injuries and its life force was draining rapidly, its eyes were dim as it glared at the cave stubbornly. The golden Hou was defeated and had already retreated to the god-slaying valley to stand shoulder to shoulder with the purple Hou. As for the Dragon Phoenix and Kunpeng taboos, they abandoned the Primordial 8 races and chased after the golden Hou the entire way. Upon arriving they witnessed the scene at the god-slaying valley. It was as though the two taboos understood everything instantly. Both taboos lowered their heads in regret against the two divine Hous. However, the Primordial War was irreversible. Both of them were severely injured and helpless. This battle had exhausted all their lives. Even at the end of the battle, the purple Hou did not retreat at all and killed all the god race beings in the god-slaying valley. The seventh painting, Death of the Taboos. The Dragon Phoenix, Kunpeng and two divine Hous were severely injured in this battle. The two divine Hous died. Not long after, the Dragon Phoenix and Kunpeng were severely injured as well and failed their tribulations, turning into ashes. Su Zimo finally understood why the Illumination Dragon Grand Elder had once told him that the Dragon Phoenix was filled with regrets before its death. The regret was not because of the wounds left behind by this battle. It was because the Dragon Phoenix felt guilty towards the two divine Hous. It was true that the god race instigated the Primordial War. However, it was not without the selfish motives of the Dragon Phoenix and Kunpeng. One could imagine that the divine Hous were the strongest in the Primordial era with two of them. The Dragon Phoenix and Kunpeng must have been wary of them. They might have had thoughts of suppressing the divine Hous. That was why they were able to be provoked by the god race which resulted in the Primordial War. Su Zimo laughed mockingly. The two poor divine Hous. Even though they protected Kunlun and Tianhuang mainland, they were misunderstood by the world in the end. The most tragic thing was that even their descendant was despised and hunted by the later generations, almost dying in Tianhuang mainland. It's all because of the god race. Extreme Fire said hatefully with rage surging in his eyes. Nian Qi pursed her lips silently with a pale expression. Although she had nothing to do with the Primordial War, the bloodline of the god race flowed through her body. She felt guilty towards Night Spirit and the entire Tianhuang mainland. The three of them continued and arrived before the 8th painting. This was also the final painting. Above the Kunlun ruins, the golden Hou and purple Hou burned their final breaths and released a blinding light that enveloped the Kunlun ruins. Both divine Hous looked at the divine Hou egg not far away with deep reluctance and worry. The words beneath the 8th painting were Kunlun barrier. At that point, realization flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. He finally understood the origin of the Kunlun barrier. He finally understood the reason why the barrier existed. On the one hand, the Kunlun barrier was to seal the Rainbow Cave and prevent the god race from invading again. On the other hand, it was to protect Night Spirit. With the existence of the Kunlun barrier, the Kunlun ruins was an isolated place. The people outside could not enter and neither could those inside get out. It was even more impossible for the primordial races to step into the Kunlun ruins. The remaining races that remained were forces of the two divine Hous. Night Spirit could only grow safely and become a taboo in such an environment. As for Night Spirit, he would grow and rule over the former forces of the Kunlun ruins, turning into the new Kunlun Lord. Chapter 1510 Son of the Divine Hous. Chapter 1510, Son of the Divine Hous. The two divine Hous put in painstaking effort and were worried about the god race and Night Spirit even if they had to die. That was why they burned their lives to leave behind the Kunlun barrier. Unfortunately, by some freak coincidence, Fairy Ling Long entered the Kunlun ruins and took Night Spirit away, placing him in the Ling Long secret ground. When Night Spirit finally returned in this generation, the Kunlun ruins were no longer a world for him. Su Zimo looked at the 8 paintings with a conflicted expression and remained silent for a long time. The 8 paintings resolved all the doubts and revealed all the secrets of the primordial war. However, the 8 drawings did not describe the tragic, miserable and sorrowful aftermath of the battle. If not for the great strokes of this master painter, if they had not arrived at the ruins and saw the 8 paintings, who would have known the truth of the primordial war? The two divine Hous must hate the god race immensely. That's the reason why they left such killing intent and resentment in the Kunlun barrier. Nian Qi said dejectedly. Unlike Su Zimo and Extreme Fire, Nian Qi felt extremely terrible after looking at the 8 paintings and felt endless guilt and self-blame. She did not know how she should face Night Spirit and Su Zimo in the future. It was her ancestors who triggered the primordial war. Night Spirit's parents were indirectly killed. Countless races were indirectly killed. Countless innocent living beings were buried in the ruins. In fact, Nian Qi felt as though the blood flowing through her body was dirty. Nian Qi, it's not your fault. Don't think too much. Noticing the change in Nian Qi's expression, Su Zimo vaguely guessed something and consoled her softly. Nian Qi forced a smile and lowered her head in a daze. I got it. Right then, Extreme Fire said in a deep voice, when Night Spirit was placed in the Ling Long secret ground in the ancient era, the Kunlun ruins became leaderless and the old factions fought against one another. Given the Tao Tai's combat strength, it was easy for him to become the Kunlun Lord. The current Kunlun Lord is the descendant of the Tao Tai in the past. Now that Night Spirit has returned and wants to rule over the Kunlun race, there will definitely be a conflict with this current Tao Tai. That's the reason why the so-called battle to exterminate the traitors broke out. After a brief pause, Extreme Fire continued, however, time passed. After so many years, the Tao Tai race has long established supreme prestige in the Kunlun ruins. Even Night Spirit's return can't compare to it. Su Zimo nodded. But no matter what, the Tao Tai was just a part of the divine Hous forces in the past. Night Spirit is the true Kunlun Lord. Through the Tao Tai, they knew that Night Spirit was not alone in the Kunlun ruins. Even after countless years, there were still many Kunlun clansmen who stood firmly on Night Spirit's side. I'm just curious. Extreme Fire frowned. Although the Kunlun race on the side of Tao Tai is massive, how did Night Spirit lose so badly given his capabilities? Narrowing his gaze slightly, Su Zimo recalled the words of the Kunlun Lord and his heart skipped a beat. The god race. What? Extreme Fire asked instinctively. Su Zimo said, the Kunlun Lord once said that the guests he invited would also arrive at the Kunlun ruins today. There's a high chance that those so-called guests are from the god race. You mean to say that the Kunlun barrier that sealed the Rainbow Cave might not be able to defend against the god race anymore? Extreme Fire's heart skipped a beat. That's a possibility. Su Zimo said deeply, This barrier has existed for countless years after all. It's only normal for its power to deplete. Do you remember when we first arrived at the Kunlun barrier? I crossed it. Extreme Fire nodded. Su Zimo continued, under normal circumstances, even I can't pass through the barrier left behind by two divine house burning away their lives. But now, it's not surprising for the god race to be able to cross it since I was able to do so as well. Su Zimo's expression was cold as killing intent surged in his eyes. If this Tao Tai is only fighting with Night Spirit for the position of the Kunlun Lord, it's not considered a great crime. However, his crime of colluding with the god race is unforgivable. Extreme Fire turned murderous as well. Let's go and kill him until the world is overturned. Without a word, Su Zimo had already leaped up and sped towards the god-slaying valley in the west. Extreme Fire followed closely behind. Nian Qi hesitated slightly and followed hurriedly. God-slaying valley. Many Kunlun clansmen with purple gold ribbons tied around their waists guarded the entrance of the valley. Looking towards the extreme west of the valley, one could see god race beings exiting one after another from that gigantic cave that shone with a rainbow luster. Those god race beings wielded gigantic swords and spears and were clad in armor. Their expressions were cold, but none of them could pass through the god-slaying valley. That was because there was a terrifying figure with torrential demonic chi in the middle of the valley. The figure was dozens of feet tall and was covered in purple gold scales. Its tail was long and its tailbone was incomparably sharp, as though it could penetrate everything. The head of the demon beast was gigantic and resembled a wolf's head. However, it was more menacing than a wolf's head. A set of sharp teeth shone with a cold glint. The type of damage that would be caused by the shocking bite strength of that gigantic head coupled with those sharp teeth was unimaginable. The four legs of the demon beast shone with purple gold flames and melted the god race corpses beneath them. The god race beings charged forward and were killed by the demon beast. Beneath its feet were corpses of the god race that flowed with warm blood. Roar! The purple gold demon beast opened its mouth and charged towards the rainbow cave not far away, letting out a deafening roar with a chilling killing intent. In that roar, all the Kunlun clansmen on the other end of the valley seemed to be stunned as they stopped in their tracks. Ha 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 ha. Right then, a burst of laughter sounded. Not far to the east, a black patch of spirit vessels sped over. On the gigantic warship in the lead, the Tao Tai and the four commanders stood at the bow. Demonic chi surged and they were laughing. Another 10 million Kunlun army had descended. The Kunlun clansmen that guarded the entrance of the valley with the purple gold ribbon revealed despair in their eyes. There were only a few 100,000 of them left. Furthermore, every single Kunlun clansman was injured. The difference in numbers and strength was too great. The final hope in their hearts was destroyed along with the descent of Tao Tai. The former commander of the Divine Ho looked back at the tall figure in the valley and sighed gently. Although the son of the Divine House was young, he already had the bearing they possessed in the past. If not for the invasion of the god race, even if the Tao Tai's side had the advantage of 100 times in numbers, they might not be able to secure victory against the head of the son of the Divine House. However, the son of the Divine House was unable to escape. One side was the Kunlun race. The other side was the god race. The son of the Divine House could only make a choice. His choice was the same as his mother's. He guarded the god-slaying valley alone and isolated all the god race beings. Even if he had to die in battle, he would not permit a single god race being to step into Tianhuang Mainland. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.